Chapter 94. The Dragon Crossing the River and the Local Snake. Chapter 94. The Dragon Crossing the River and the Local Snake on her way over here. Ning Qingxue hadn't really met any bandits, and thought Xiao Lei had been exaggerating since. Although this was the border, it shouldn't be so chaotic. However, now she realized how chaotic Flowing Snake was. She had been harassed in public, and yet no one even tried to put some restraints on that man. I'll give you 3 seconds, pour some wine for me and repent, or I'll strip you here and F*** you. Wei never had the patience to wait for a woman. For him, women were only for men to use. Ning Qingxue looked at the room full of cold glares and this Wei's ferocious complexion with a pale face and her heart shaking. Even if she died, she didn't want to be our *ped here. Furthermore, she hadn't even met Yemo yet. Ning Qingxue, who had never been in contact with the dark side of the world, finally understood what unreasonable meant. She had thought that she was mature, but some things had to be encountered before one knew of its terror. I'm looking for my husband, Yemo. He's in Flowing Snake. You can't touch me. Even Ning Qingxue felt that her tone was pale and weak. She just heard Xiao Lei had been saved by Yemo here, so she said his name out loud to see if anyone knew him. Ha ha ha! Your husband will be me from now on. What Yemo? If he's in Flowing Snake, I will make him disappear. Wei laughed cockily and actually reached out his hand to grab Ning Qingxue. Extreme disgust flashed across Ning Qingxue's as she dodged aside once again. Wei was completely angry this time. There had not been a woman who dared to reject him. But today, this woman rejected him multiple times, making him lose a lot of face. Wait, Brother Wei, can you listen to a word of mine? A young man in his 20s suddenly walked over and said. Everyone looked with surprise at this person who had dared to disturb Wei at this moment. Did he want to die? But when people saw who this was, no one added another word. The person who came up was called Rock, Fong Nan's personal guard. Although Flowing Snake wasn't 100% the land of the Pu Dao clan, there were no gangs who could rival them ever since the Vietnamese gang and the Philippines gang had been annihilated. Most people who came to Flowing Snake for business would give some respect to this local snake, the Pu Dao clan. Although Wei was extremely unhappy being interrupted, he still knew Rock. This young man had always been beside Fong Nan and had some power in the Pu Dao clan, so although he was a dragon crossing the river, he didn't want to overdo it. He had no choice but to say, Brother Rock, if you have anything to say, please do, but I'm having this woman for sure. Hopefully you can explain fast so I can go about my business. Although his tone was slightly polite, that arrogance was undeniably there. Obviously, although he respected Rock a little, he was not afraid of the Pu Dao clan. Rock's face changed, but didn't argue back as he knew Wei's origin. He could not only live well in Flowing Snake, but many places at the border because he was a powerful person from the amphibian gang. For the amphibian gang, the Pu Dao clan could barely be called a local snake because the amphibian clan was the greatest clan at the border. Their activities were located at the borders of the Asian countries and did lucrative business. It was said that the amphibian gang belonged to Nongqing, and those part of the eastern underground world would shiver at the mention of this name. Flowing Snake was just a small stop for them. The consequences were imaginable if they offended the amphibian gang. So even when Wei wasn't too polite to Rock, he didn't dare to say anything. If I may ask, you said that your husband was named Yemo. Which Yemo are you talking about? Rock came to the door and asked. He knew that Wei was very impetuous. Just when Ning Qingxue didn't know what to do anymore, someone came to ask her. She immediately felt like she was someone who was about to drown, but managed to grab a hold of a floating block of wood. It wasn't that she was afraid of death since she had already died once, but losing her loyalty was more horrifying than death. Otherwise, she wouldn't be throwing a fret about being looked at last time when she was treated by Yemo. When Rock asked, she replied immediately, I came to look for my husband Yemo. He came to Flowing Snake before. I knew for my friend and came to look for him. Then Ning Qingshuo described Yi Mo's appearance. Hearing Ning Qingshuo's words, Rock was already sure that Ning Qingshuo was talking about Brother Yi. It was not surprising. Only Brother Yi would have such a beautiful wife. However, Rock knew Shi Wei's character and turned around to his follower. Tell Brother Nan that Brother Ye's wife came. What do you mean? Shi Wei felt quite obviously that Rock's words weren't right. It didn't seem like he planned on giving her to him. Sorry, Brother Shi, this woman belongs to our Brother Yi. You can't touch her. Then Rock waved his hand, and 3 of his henchmen came up. Shi Wei's face sunk. This means that you're acting against me. Does Fong not want to stay here anymore? I'm telling you, I'm having this woman today, and even if Fong Nan comes, I will still take her. Brothers, take this woman away. As soon as Shi Wei had spoken, the 4 tattooed youth, who were originally just standing at the side watching, immediately charged up. Rock's face changed, and after a moment's hesitation, he waved his hand and his henchmen also came. The 2 sides immediately formed a dichotomy. A mere follower like you dare to take my woman. Do you really think I don't dare to do anything to you? Wait until I break your leg and ask for an explanation from Fong Nan. Brothers attack. Shi Wei's words were full of ferociousness and cruelty. With Shi Wei's order, the 2 sides immediately started fighting. The hack swords they hid in their clothes were all taken out, and immediately, blood spilled everywhere at this hotel. Ning Qingshuo retreated to the door in a panic. At this moment, she truly realized just how chaotic it was here. There was a crowd of people hacking at each other, but no one came to manage the situation. Because Rock had fewer people, they were quickly on the losing side, but just when Shi Wei wanted to drag Ning Qingshuo away and leave, another 20 people suddenly came to the door. Fong Nan's furious voice sounded, "Beat these bastards to the death! Fong Nan, you dare to touch me? Do you not want to live anymore?" Hearing Fong Nan's words, Shi Wei was worried and angry. He didn't think that the boss of a small place dared to touch him since he was comparable to an ambassador of a big nation to a small country here. Although the local snakes here didn't have to circle him, they wouldn't offend him for a woman. I don't mind you taking some benefits from my domain, but you dare to touch Brother Ye's woman. Do you want to die? Beat him hard. Fong Nan knew the consequences of offending Shi Wei, but he was already respecting Yi Mo like a god, and this woman was his wife. How would he let other people touch her? Not only that, he was going to show his attitude for Ning Qingshuo to see. Otherwise, he wouldn't be able to explain himself to Yi Mo. Chapter 95. The Second Beautiful Lady Who Comes to Flowing Snake. Chapter 95. The second beautiful lady who comes to Flowing Snake with the men Fong Nan had brought. Shi Wei didn't have the slightest ability to resist before having one leg broken. However, Fong Nan didn't dare to kill him. Although he didn't need to be held responsible legally for his death, the amphibious gang was too strong. If he had killed Shi Wei, there would only be a war between the two. The reason he broke Shi Wei's leg was mainly to show some respect to Ning Qingshuo. Take your men and P*SS off immediately. Fong Nan didn't hesitate to kick out Shi Wei. In this flowing snake, his words still had power. Although Shi Wei was extremely angry, he couldn't do anything about it in Flowing Snake. If Fong Nan told him to leave, that was the only thing he could do. Even if he wanted his revenge, he had to wait until he reported the incident here with exaggeration. Shi Wei took his few men and left this hotel. They just swapped for another one, but didn't leave Flowing Snake. One reason was that it was already late, and he had a broken leg, so they had nowhere else to go. Another one was that even if Fong Nan knew that he hadn't left Flowing Snake, Fong Nan wouldn't go look for him. Fong Nan indeed knew that Shi Wei hadn't left Flowing Snake, but he didn't dare to do things over the top. If it was regarding the incident with Ning Qingshuo, he had the rights to, but if he were to kick Shi Wei out of Flowing Snake, then he wouldn't have any justification. If he was stronger, then it didn't matter if he was being unreasonable or not. But no matter how strong he was, he wouldn't be stronger than the amphibious clan. Ning Qingxue stared dumbfoundedly at the fight that had started because of her. It started fast and finished fast and left a ground full of blood. She didn't think that Yi Mo had such loyal friends in Flowing Snake. She felt more confused about Yi Mo, who spent his time growing flowers all day long. Then she thought about how Song Shaowen and Song Xiaotan were killed by him, plus what she had seen today. It seemed that what Xiao Lei had told her was true. Yi Mo really had great capabilities. Then why did she hear in Beijing that Yi Mo was a completely useless human being? Fong Nan saw Ning Qingshue's face and was stunned as he thought that only someone like Brother Yi could have such a wife. This woman was a bit too beautiful. However, Fong Nan respectfully transferred Ning Qingxue to another special place and told her the things about Yi Mo and Flowing Snake. He even didn't hide the fact that Yi Mo had annihilated 2 clans. In his view, Ning Qingxue was Yi Mo's wife, so she must have already known about what Yi Mo had done. The more Ning Qingxue heard, the more astonished she was. She didn't think that Yi Mo had done so much in Flowing Snake in such a short period of time. He had beaten the bosses here to be respectful of him. However, what made Ning Qingxue disappointed was that Yi Mo didn't come back and seemed to have gone somewhere else. Ning Qingxue suddenly felt a little lonely sleeping at this borderline fort in Flowing Snake. She didn't know why she came to find Yi Mo. From the start, Yi Mo was just helping her. Even the marriage was fake. Did she love him, or was it because of something else? What if she really did find Yi Mo? What should she say? Was she going to say, "Sorry, I shouldn't have treated you like that before," and then no matter what Yi Mo replied, she would go back to her own life? Ning Qingxue suddenly felt lost. Love? What was love? Regardless of whether she loved Yi Mo, was she going to find someone else to marry afterward? She had no intentions of divorce after marrying with Yi Mo, but was she supposed to find Yi Mo and tell him that she didn't want a divorce? Was that all? Ning Qingxue sighed. The more she thought that she understood Yi Mo, the more she was confused, which was very contradictory. Although she didn't understand Yi Mo very much, she felt that out of all the people she had met, no one was as magnanimous as him, and perhaps he was the one she needed. Originally, she had a skewed view of Yi Mo, probably because she didn't really understand him. After he was gone, she didn't divorce, and perhaps at that time, she had subconsciously agreed to be his wife. But before this, she had to find him. Otherwise, if Yi Mo marries one day while she still calls herself his wife, then that would be too ridiculous. Ning Qingxue had her principles. Although she was willing to marry Yi Mo, she wasn't someone to cry and beg for the marriage if Yi Mo didn't want her. Ning Qingxue twisted and turned in the sleepless night. Just when she slept for a while, the day was bright already. She didn't meet Yi Mo in Flowing Snake and thus no longer had the intention to stay anymore. But before she left, she wanted to see that pagoda where Yi Mo lived at. Although it had all collapsed, Fong Nan had sent people to rebuild it. Ning Qingxue wanted to see where Yi Mo lived before. So Fong Nan brought a few henchmen and went with her himself. Flowing Snake was so chaotic, he didn't want Yi Mo's wife to have more troubles here. If this sort of thing happened, he wouldn't be able to say anything to Yi Mo. Not to mention, Yi Mo saved his life before and helped him get back the ruling authority here. Besides, Yi Mo was not hesitant in killing, and his gang didn't even have enough people for Yi Mo to kill. Ever since she had done her last mission, Qi Wanqing no longer had the mood to stay in the military. Every few days, she would call Luo Cang and asked her cousin, Zhuman, if Yi Mo went over. But each time, she received a disappointing answer. Yi Mo didn't go to the company her cousin managed in Luotsang. Of course, Qi Wanqing knew that Yi Mo lived a tight life, so since she had found him a job, why wouldn't he go? Was it because of his dignity? However, she thought that brother, you didn't seem like that sort of person. She thought about it a few times and decided to go look for Yi Mo herself. She felt that if she didn't go find him, perhaps this brother Yi would never come looking for her in her entire lifetime. Although she was a bit bitter, she still decided to go to Flowing Snake and look for Yi Mo. Yi Mo told her last time that he was there. So since he didn't go to Luotsang, it meant that he was still in Flowing Snake. This was the first time since Qi Wanqing entering the military that she applied for a family visit leave. Although Lo Lin felt that Qi Wanqing wouldn't be visiting her family, it was Qi Wanqing's first time. So although Lu Lin was dubious, she could only allow it. Obviously, Qi Wanqing didn't go see her family. She went to Flowing Snake to look for Yi Mo. She had experienced a lot more than Ningqing Xue, so of course, she knew what sort of place Flowing Snake was, but she wouldn't be scared. With her expertise, she wouldn't be afraid of even a few bulky men. Plus, she still had her bear cockroach and knew exactly how strong it was since she almost lost her life when she had been bitten by it. If it hadn't been for Yi Mo, she would have been dead already. Although Flowing Snake was very chaotic, it didn't pose a threat to her. It was just midday when Qi Wanqing arrived there. Just when she got there, she saw two people carrying Sherwei into a car to leave Flowing Snake. Although Qi Wanqing wanted to ask around about Yi Mo, she could tell that Sherwei and these men weren't good people, so she didn't even plan to ask from them. However, Sherwei's eyes were glued to Qi Wanqing. He didn't think he would meet two breathtaking women in 2 days. He still had such luck when he was about to leave. Fong Nan, so what if you robbed one away? I still met another today. As he looked at Qi Wanqing, his eyes were beaming. While still laying on the portable bed, he yelled without hesitation, "Take this woman away! We leave Flowing Snake, but I will have my revenge one day." Chapter 96. The Old Ginger Song, Yuani. Chapter 96. The Old Ginger Song, Yuani, of course. Qi Wanqing knew how chaotic Flowing Snake was, and wasn't even planning on talking with those hoodlum-looking people. She wasn't like Ningqing Xue. The things she had learned in the military weren't for show. She immediately kicked the two men who didn't even take her seriously, and were kicked to the ground. And she didn't stop here. She went up and kicked twice again. Everyone could even hear the sound of bones cracking. Sherwei was very annoyed that the women he had seen today dared to resist. But before he was able to release his anger, he found that his two men had their leg broken by Qi Wanqing. Before he was able to scream, Qi Wanqing kicked again, right on his leg that had been just plastered. Sherwei's howl could be heard almost a mile away, but in a place like Flowing Snake, no matter how much you screamed, no one would come and see. The remaining two men carrying Sherwei were already shaking. They had never seen a woman with such strong power who didn't even hesitate when fighting. There were a few youths who had seen Qi Wanqing in the distance and wanted to harass her, but they immediately backed off after seeing the scene. This woman dared to beat Sherwei. How could she care about them? In fact, if Sherwei had immediately chosen to send all of his men to attack Qi Wanqing at the same time, perhaps Qi Wanqing would have some trouble, but only two went first, and these two had such a whimsical attitude that the result could be expected. However, even if Sherwei took it seriously at the start, Qi Wanqing wouldn't mind. At most, she would have released Little Wolf. But if she did, people would die. Although Qi Wanqing knew how chaotic this place was, she didn't want to kill people so easily. Amidst the howls, Sherwei didn't think the second beautiful girl would be so troublesome. Sherwei, who was under unbearable pain, saw that this woman didn't seem like she wanted to punish him more. So he resisted the pain and called out, "Leave quickly!" Qi Wanqing saw them leave, but didn't care. She was prepared to ask someone, but unexpectedly, the person who walked up toward her was a woman even prettier than her. However, this woman had a few men following behind her and appeared to be the leader of a gang. Was the head of Flowing Snake a woman? However, this woman didn't seem to dress like that. She seemed more like a docile, well-educated girl. No matter what, it was better to face a woman than a man. Thinking about this, Qi Wanqing walked toward this woman. She wanted to ask about Yemo. When Ning Qingxue first saw Qi Wanqing, she felt that something was strange, but couldn't say what it was. However, it felt very real. Didn't they say that flowing snake was chaotic? How come such a pretty woman, not one bit inferior to me, is here? She was startled. Fong Nan and several of his men were accompanying Ning Qingxue, who went to see the pagoda, and when they saw that breathtaking woman, they started to wonder what was going on recently in this place, since 2 women of such caliber came consecutively in 2 days. Fortunately, they hadn't seen Qi Wanqing kicking the other men, or their impressions would have been different. "Hello, do you know if a man named Yemo is here?" Qi Wanqing asked as she blocked Ning Qingxue's group. "You are also looking for him." Ning Qingxue was surprised as she looked at the woman in front of her. She was charming, yet had the look of a martial artist. It was not surprising that she had such a strange feeling earlier, almost as if she had a sixth sense. "You are." Qi Wanqing looked curiously at Ning Qingxue, wondering what Yemo's relationship was with such an excellent woman. "Oh, she's called Ning Qingxue, Brother Ye's wife." Fong Nan saw the atmosphere was awkward, and obviously this handsome-looking girl also knew Yemo, so he quickly introduced her. Meanwhile, he thought, Brother Yi is indeed strong. Even the girls he knew aren't ordinary. "Huh, your Brother Ye's wife?" That Qi Wanqing managed to hold back, one who used Brother Yi as a shield. However, she no longer had a good impression of Ning Qingxue. Ning Qingxue also seemed to notice that she had some enmity toward her and didn't know what to say anymore. She didn't even ask what she was to Yemo, as she was scared that she wouldn't be able to handle the result. The atmosphere was awkward once again. Even Fong Nan could tell what was happening. The 2 seemed to have a conflict over Brother Yi, and he was immediately worried. Both of these women seemed to be related to Brother Yi, so it was not good to help either of them. One seemed to be the legal and the other the hidden. He couldn't let them stare off like this. If they had a fight, he would be the one to suffer. Thinking about this, Fong Nan wiped the sweat from his forehead and said, It's already noon, and we're all starving. Why don't we go eat first? We can talk about Brother Yi after food." He was the gang leader and always lived his life on the edge, but now it was really hard for him to be the peacekeeper between 2 women. Other than Qi Wanqing and Ning Qingxue looking for Yemo, the Song family was also discussing about Yemo. Although all sorts of signs indicated that Song Xiaotan's death was related to Yemo, it was not surprising that he could kill Song Xiaotan. However, it would be shocking if he could actually kill Hu Qiu. Thus, the Song family still couldn't be sure that Song Xiaotan was killed by Yemo. Can we confirm that the Shi who suddenly appeared in Ninghai and disappeared is Yemo? The Song family had 2 of their 3rd-generation children murdered, so Song Qiming's anger could no longer be described. Although Song Shaoan was his son, Song Xiaotan was the brightest one in the 3rd generation, yet he was killed in Ninghai. We can't be sure yet because even though he looks quite similar to Yemo, the face of Shi Ying is too blurred. The main thing is Shi Ying's power is definitely higher than Hu Qiu. Otherwise, he wouldn't be able to beat Pu Dongheng in one move. The greatest point of suspicion is that Fong Weiqing first saw Shi Ying at Ningdu district, and that's where Yemo was living at the time. Songhai reported every detail of his investigation. It doesn't matter whether Shi Ying is Yemo or not. He has a great connection to Xiaotan's death. Besides, Shi Ying kills with metal nails, and up until now, we haven't found any ancient martial arts family that likes to kill with metal nails. The old man who spoke was 50 or so, Song Qishan. He was called Uncle Shin. His status was just below Old Man Song and Song Qiming. Although Song Qiming was the leader of the family in this meeting, his status wasn't the highest. Old Man Song, also known as Song Yuani, was the real leader. Old Man Song could stay calm if Song Shaoan died because, even though Shaoan was his direct descendant, he didn't have much of a future. However, concerning Song Xiaotan, it was different. It was the grandson he had the most hopes for, but now that he was dead, Old Man Song could no longer be indifferent. Normally, he rarely came to the family meetings, but today he came. Although he was full of rage, he still appeared to be composed. After hearing these few people, Song Yuani opened his closed eyes and said, "Continue to investigate the relationship between Shi Ing and Yemo. But we're only investigating. Stop the hunt for Yemo for now." When everyone looked confusedly at Old Man Song, he said plainly, "It doesn't matter whether we have Yemo or Shi Ying's location. We just need to think of a way to make Qian Longtu know. Yemo had already raised the attention of that Yi family. What you need to do is to let Qian Longtu know that Yemo killed his son." After pausing for a bit, Old Man Song continued, "And you need to let the Yi family know Yemo's excellence, but don't reveal that Yemo possibly killed Qian Longtu's only son. Other than that, we just need to enjoy the show. Besides, could it be so simple to kill Hu Qiu?" Near the end, Song Yuani's tone grew bleak. Everyone understood the old man's intentions and couldn't help to think that the oldest gingers were the spiciest. Making Qian Longtu deal with the Yi family, and at the crucial moment, all the Song family had to do was give it a push. The old man's intentions were to use this opportunity to completely smash the Yi family to a point where they would never be able to recover. Of course, Yemo didn't know that 2 women had been looking for him in Flowing Snake, and he didn't know the shenanigans that the Song family was using against the Yi family. Even if he knew, he would pretend he didn't know since he had no relationship with the Yi family anymore. He had opened his little clinic, but was still operating without a license. Not only was the position far off the center of the city, but there were only him and Yu Era now. He chose this distant place because other places were too expensive, but the main reason was that this place was in an old private house, and when Yemo rented the old house, he had paid for 2 years' rent. There was a yard in the back of the house where he could grow silver heart grass, which was exactly what Yemo wanted. For him, business came after growing the silver heart grass. However, the 3rd day that the clinic had opened, they had their first patient when they least expected. Yemo and Yu Eru were awoken by a hurried knock in the middle of the night. Chapter 97. First Patient. Chapter 97. First patient, a 5-year-old kid, was carried inside. Not only were his eyes tightly shut and his face was pale, but his body was also convulsing. "Doctor, please save my son. The ambulance is coming, but they still need 20 minutes before they get here. I'm afraid my Zangson won't last more than 10 minutes. As soon as Yu Eru opened the door, a middle-aged woman carried a small child inside, screaming for help. Following close behind was a middle-aged man. His face was also showing how worried he was. Other than these 2, there was also a woman in her 50s behind them. Yemo wondered if the whole family had come. The child probably had a relapse in his condition and needed to go to the hospital. However, the ambulance could only arrive 20 minutes later, and the family was afraid that his condition would worsen before the 20 minutes. So they came to this clinic, trying to save the child's life for now. They were doing all they could in this time of crisis. "Master." Although Yi Eru learned Chinese medicine from his grandpa, he realized under Yemo's tutelage that his medical skills were far superior to his grandpa, so he called Yemo master. Yemo was prepared to teach Yu Eru medicine, so he didn't stop him from calling him master. The condition of the child now was obviously out of Yu Eru's range of ability. Yemo walked over and said to that woman, "Put your child on the bed." The woman was panicking now, so hearing Yemo's words, she immediately put the child on the bed and didn't even try to ask Yemo any questions. Seeing that the child on the bed, Yemo took out his silver needles and was about to use them. "Wait, what do you want to do?" "We just want you to gain some time for the child to wait for an ambulance. Why are you taking out the needle for?" The middle-aged man had come back to his senses as he looked at the needles. They were originally so worried that they tried to get all the help they could get. From his child convulsing to now, it had already been a few minutes, but he was calmer now, yet the doctor of a small street-side clinic was going to use needles on his child, so he immediately reacted. This was only a clinic that opened a few days ago, and he didn't even see a certificate here. Yemo stopped the needle in his hand and looked indifferently at the middle-aged man and didn't talk. For him, since the child was brought here, he didn't mind saving the child. But if the parents didn't even believe in him, he didn't need to mind others' business. He was a cultivator. Although he had spent quite some time on Earth, he still didn't weight the lives of normal people very much. However, he wasn't a heartless person either, so he would help if he could. When people believed that his money had been stolen on the train, they immediately came to help him. So he felt that he should also help other people. However, it was impossible for him to beg to treat this child. He had already scanned the child with his spirit sense. It wasn't a simple heart condition. His arteries were close to the bursting point, and if they fully exploded, this child wouldn't last long. Yemo understood the medical level here, and currently the child's condition was incurable in this world. Seeing that Yemo stopped his hand, the middle-aged man didn't know what to say and was frozen. "Since you don't trust me, please leave." Yemo took back the silver needles. This set had been brought over by Ueru. Ueru had often been with his grandpa treating patients before. He really didn't like those people who didn't trust in the doctor, so as he saw the situation, he immediately said, "You are lucky that my master can help to treat your child." So every time he and his grandpa went out to treat patients, people would be overjoyed and treated them with great hospitality. So why were they treated like this here? "Do you want Zangson to be like this forever? Move over." After saying that, the woman pushed the man aside and suddenly kneeled down in front of Emo. "Doctor, please save Zangson. He was already like this last time, and if we hadn't been right outside the hospital at that time, he would have lost his life. Please." Her intentions were very simple. The doctor didn't even ask about the condition and took out the needle to treat Zangson, which meant that he really had a great ability. Otherwise, he should be asking about his conditions at least. Furthermore, she had heard that those doctors who used acupuncture were usually very abled, since ordinary doctors didn't know how to use it. Yemo waved his hand and said, "Get up, I'll look at your child for you, but you're affecting my treatment by kneeling there." Hearing Yemo's words, the woman quickly got up. The man who was pushed aside by the woman saw the child's face go from white to purple and immediately realized that the child was in danger. However, the ambulance still hadn't arrived yet, so he didn't speak anymore. That older woman stared at the child soullessly and probably didn't even know what to say anymore. Yemo, however, quickly pierced the needle into the child's body. He didn't even need to take the child's clothes off. These people didn't understand acupuncture, so they didn't know that usually the clothes needed to be taken off. However, Ueru understood it a bit, but in his opinion, Yemo was already capable, so it didn't matter to him if the clothes weren't taken off. Of course, Yemo didn't use traditional acupuncture. He was using the needles as a bridge to pass his qi into the child's body and gradually ease the damaged arteries. This wasn't a complete treatment. Otherwise, he would have to repair the arteries. Yemo wouldn't dare to treat it now, whether he were able to or not. If such a troublesome condition was treated by his small clinic, he would no longer be able to keep a low profile like he wanted to. However, if he eased the condition, that would still be reasonable, so he shouldn't attract too much attention. In order to completely treat this condition, Yemo had to first reach the 3rd stage, then use many other herbs. As Yemo used his qi, the dead arteries in the child's body were gradually recovering their functions. The purple on his skin was continuously fading, and after 10 minutes, the child's face returned to normal. Even those who didn't understand medicine could tell that the child was getting better. The man and woman were overwhelmed with joy and came up to grab the child's hand. Meanwhile, Yemo was left to the side. At this moment, the siren of the ambulance could be heard. Finally, the couple remembered that their child was saved by Yemo and hurried over to thank him. Yemo waved his hand. "The ambulance is here. Take your child to the hospital." Despite knowing that the hospital couldn't cure this disease completely, it would be good to get a checkup. The couple didn't dare to waste time and took the child into the ambulance. They didn't even have time to pay the fees. Qi Wanqing and Ning Qingxue, who were in Flowing Snake, had understood now that both of them didn't know where Yimo went. From Ning Qingshue's mouth, Qi Wanqing understood that Yi Mo had offended the Song family, which shocked her quite a bit. Although her grandpa was a soldier, and so was her father, compared to the Song family, they were far off. Wanqing, what do you mean Yi Mo could have possibly gone to the desert? Hearing Qi Wanqing's words, Ning Qingxue had completely believed that Yi Mo wasn't an ordinary person. Even though she didn't understand why Yi Mo was pretending to be a normal person and was even kicked out of the Yi family. I feel that he is definitely going there. I was by his side at the time when he found that ragged goatskin map, and I helped him interpret the Tibetan words on it. His expression at the time was very joyful. My guess is that he is probably looking for something there, Qi Wanqing said with certainty. Ning Qingxue believed Qi Wanqing's words. Yimo's actions were weird, regardless whether it was not sleeping at night but sitting under a tree or sleeping on the stone floor. This wasn't something that could be explained normally. She was so heavily injured at the time. If Yimo really cured her, it couldn't be explained with simply some capabilities. She knew that she had an aunt who practiced the ancient martial arts. However, she had never seen her since. From what her mother had said, it was very hard for her aunt to come out. Ancient martial arts were something very mysterious. Many people hadn't even heard of it. Was Yimo also a cultivator of ancient martial arts? But even if he did, he shouldn't be able to treat such serious wounds. The more Ning Qingxue thought about it, the more she was confused, so she could only stop thinking and looked at Qi Wanqing. Do you still have that map? Qi Wanqing took out from her bag a map that she had drawn later and passed it to Ning Qingxue. I drew it afterward, but it's the exact same as the other one. Ning Qingxue took the map. It was very simple and just marked a few places of the Taklamakan Desert. There were also some lines with a few labels next to it that were obviously not on the borders of the desert, but the very depth. Ning Qingxue had also heard of the Taklamakan Desert, the Sea of Death in the fables, but she didn't understand what Yimo was looking for over there. After staring at the map for a long time, Ning Qingxue said, "Can you give one to me?" However, Qi Wanqing said, "I remember the map very clearly, so you can take it if you want." Suddenly, Qi Wanqing thought of something as she looked at Ning Qingxue and asked, "You're not thinking of looking for him there, are you?" Chapter 98, Last News. Chapter 98, Last News. Ning Qingxue nodded. Sometimes ideas just pop out, just like how I came to Flowing Snake this time. I know it is dangerous here, but I always fantasize that I can meet Yimo and won't be in any trouble. If it had been before, I definitely wouldn't have done such a thing, but now I can't help myself. I don't know if I miss him. I can't articulate that feeling. Hearing Ning Qingxue's word, Qi Wanqing asked more curiously, "Qingxue, didn't you fake the marriage with Brother Yi? You only wanted Brother Yi to block and then divorce?" From Qi Wanqing's perspective, it was already very strange for Ning Qingxue to come look for Yimo in Flowing Snake, but now she wanted to go to the desert. Did she not use Brother Yi as a shield? From the looks of it, why does she seem to have fallen in love with Brother Yi? Ning Qingxue shook her head bitterly, remaining silent for a while before saying, "I don't know why, it's just a feeling. Now, I thought I could hear about him from other people. But if there is no longer information about him, perhaps I will never see him again in this big world. I thought Flowing Snake was the last place I could find information about him, but I didn't think I could learn from you that he could have gone to the desert. If I just really lose my lead on him like this, I will regret many years later." Then Ning Qingxue hesitated for a moment before continuing, "You don't understand me. If it were a few months ago, I would definitely not come to a place like Flowing Snake, much less the desert. Sometimes you wouldn't even notice yourself changing. When you understand, you will discover that some people you are fated to not forget. Indeed, I used him as a shield before, but when I understood who he was, he had already left without leaving me any opportunity to apologize. Sorry, Wanqing, the reason I said those words to you was because he must treat you differently. Otherwise, he wouldn't tell you about the fake marriage. Sometimes I really admire you. He would definitely not talk to me about this, yet he had told you. Qi Wanqing looked at Ning Qingshue's expression and suddenly felt sympathy for her. She should be like herself, but a bit different. When Ning Qingxue had discovered Brother Ye's excellence, Brother Yi had already left her. Meanwhile, she was different. She had discovered his excellence when she was in contact with him. From his tone last time, he didn't seem to have the intentions of marrying her. No intentions of marrying Qingxue. Qi Wanqing blushed and thought of herself, but she immediately shook her head. She had the same intentions as Ning Qingxue. If she didn't come to find Yi Mo, he would never go look for her. So this meant that Yi Mo had the same attitude toward her that he had with Ning Qingxue. They weren't in his heart. Does he have someone he loves? Qi Wanqing suddenly wanted to see what sort of person Yi Mo was in love with. Even excellent girls such as her and Ning Qingxue weren't in his eyes. So what sort of person would he like? Qi Wanqing suddenly stopped herself from thinking and raised her head to look at Ning Qingxue. Qingxue, it's too dangerous for you to go to the desert alone. And Taklamakan is the sea of death. It is countless times more dangerous than Flowing Snake. Perhaps in Flowing Snake you could still meet Fong Nan, but in the Taklamakan, other than Sandstorm, you get the scorching sun. It's pretty much certain death there. Ning Qingxue shook her head. I know how dangerous it is, but did you know that not long ago I was someone who was mortally wounded? I've already experienced death once. I just want to ask him if I am really that bad and if it is so hard to just see me once. If he wants me to stop bothering him again, I will leave immediately. He gave me my life. It's nothing if I give it back. Ning Qingshue's tone seemed to get melancholic, and she couldn't continue talking anymore. Qi Wanqing looked at Ning Qingxue with sympathy and sighed before saying, Qingxue, are you being reckless for Brother Yi? He won't be able to see it. Why would Brother Yi want your life? My life was also saved by him. Am I going to give it back? And perhaps it's not that he doesn't want to see you, but that he really is busy. Maybe he doesn't even know that you want to see him. However, Ning Qingxue didn't talk. She was determined. Reckless or not, she couldn't calm down unless she could see Mo once. Moreover, she felt that she was right. Perhaps this was the last news of Yi Mo, and may never get to see him again if she missed this time. Even if it meant waiting on the rim of the desert, she would still wait. Seeing that Ning Qingxue didn't talk, Qi Wanqing knew that Ning Qingxue was really determined to do so. She suddenly thought about Ning Qingshue's words. This was perhaps the last news of Yi Mo. If he left the desert, then who would know where he would go next? The world was so big, who could find him? Thinking about this, Qi Wanqing suddenly said, Qingxue, how about I'll come with you? I have more experience in the desert, and I've stayed in the military for a few years. You're also going to the desert? When Ning Qingxue heard that Qi Wanqing came looking for Yi Mo, she understood that Qi Wanqing must have felt something for Yi Mo, but she didn't expect her to also want to go into the desert. Qi Wanqing nodded her head firmly and said, But before we go, we need to go to Luotsang first. I have a company there. We need to prepare. Going to the desert isn't like going to other places. We need to carry all the tools and medications with us. Fong Nan watched as the two girls left before feeling relieved. It made his heart quiver that these two girls came to Flowing Snake. If something had happened, but although they had left, the things weren't done yet. Because Fong Nan offended Sherway, he had to give Amphibious Gang an explanation. Otherwise, he wouldn't be able to stay here anymore. Fong Nan knew exactly how powerful the Amphibious Gang was. Amphibious Gang was under Nanqing. A real estate business 10 years ago, near High Point, didn't take them seriously. And in the end, Nanqing didn't even accept their apology and compensation. They were annihilated by them in one night. Every gang at the border knew about this. So for the people from the Amphibious Gang, the gang leaders at the border usually had a good attitude towards them. Now that Fong Nan offended Sherway, although he was just a messenger for them, he was still someone of the Amphibious Gang. If they reproach him for it, he must be prepared to pay the price. And if they didn't accept his compensation, he still needed to prepare himself for war. However, Fong Nan knew that for something as small as this, the amphibious gang would be fine with accepting compensation. At most, it would make his heart ache a little. They shouldn't try to annihilate him. The things he had now were given by Yemo. If it hadn't been for Yemo, there was no way he would be able to take back Flowing Snake from the Philippines and Vietnam gang. Plus, he was very respectful toward Yemo and felt that he wasn't an ordinary person. So he didn't regret that he had offended Sure Wei for these two girls. Compared to Fong Nan's trouble and the two girls' search, Yemo's clinic had received quite the notoriety, at least within the nearby region. The second day he saved Zhangxin, the child's parents came to Yemo's clinic to thank him. They also took out $10,000 as gratitude. Yemo didn't take the money. Instead, he actually gave $30,000 to the children's parents. The reason was simple. He wanted this family to help him get all the relevant documents. The child's dad was called Zhang Pa. He worked at the taxation office at Luotsang and was a native, so it should be easy for him to do such things. As Yemo felt like he shouldn't show his face if he could, he had let Eru follow Zhang Po to make the certificates and clinic registration. Many things could be sorted with money. As for whether Eru really had the skills or not, no one cared. With the fervent help of the couple, Yemo's clinic had a great reputation despite being open for only 10 days or so. This was all due to their promotional ability. This clinic was called Hui Chun Clinic after all the documents were made. Yemo pretty much didn't manage anything and just sat in the yard preparing the soil so he could plant the silver heart grass. He left the clinic entirely in the hand of Eru. Luckily, Eru had experience in medicine, and with Yemo's frequent tutelage, the small diseases that the patients had were cured easily. Yemo gave $20,000 of the remaining 40 to Eru for him to buy some herbs and kept the last 20 to prepare the tools needed for the desert. The small clinic didn't even earn money, but Yemo didn't care. His purpose was to grow the silver heart grass. Everything else didn't have priority. If he could earn money, that would be good, but if he couldn't, it didn't matter. The herbs Eru bought were cooked into soup or pills by Yemo and put into jars, and then told Eru their functions. About medical skills, Yemo never kept anything to himself. So if there was anything he could teach, he would teach it to Eru. He even taught him a set of fist technique and breathing technique. Although Eru was quite innocent, he was very smart and learned it quickly. Chapter 99. Luo Susu. Chapter 99. Luo Susu. Although Yemo had tried to reject the troublesome conditions, their clinic was still gradually rising in fame. Of course, it was due to the propaganda of the surrounding citizens, but it was mainly due to the discovery that many people only needed to come here once, and their diseases were cured, which was different than going to the hospital. If you went to the hospital, you might need to go several days in a row. However, the only bad thing about Hui Chun was that its prices were a bit high. Normally, if a child went to the hospital, it would only be some over-the-counter medicine or needles. An expenditure was around $100. However, the same disease at Hui Chun would cost $200. Nevertheless, since it was Chinese medicine, only one take of the medicine was needed, which was different to the 1-week recovery by the hospital. Many people still liked coming to this fast, effective clinic. Another saying was that Chinese medicine was neutral and more pleasant to the body than Western medicine. Originally, their business barely had any profit. Sometimes there were even losses. But because of their astounding results, they became very popular. Luckily, not much people lived here. Otherwise, the clinic really wouldn't have enough people to treat every patient. Yemo had pretty much planted the silver heart grass and barricaded it as he was prepared to go to the desert. However, he realized that his business was getting better and frowned. Yemo's idea was that it would be fine as long as the business could make some money. It didn't need to be too good. He understood the logic of keeping a low profile. However, Yemo wouldn't take the money and not cure the patients. This wasn't his character. After thinking for a long while, Guillermo could only tell Eru that the herbs were limited, and he could only see a limited amount of patients each day. The others would have to wait until the next day. However, Guillermo hadn't learned about marketing. He didn't know that after he had made this rule, his business grew more popular instead. Guillermo didn't have time to stay every day in the clinic and treat patients. Thus, he had no choice but to teach the basic means and recipes of some medicine to Eru. At the same time, he hired a girl to help, and only then did he get free time. When Qi Wanqing and Ning Qingxue came to Luotsang, Guillermo hadn't left yet. Sometimes, one looked very hard but didn't even realize that it was just right beside him. Ning Qingxue and Qi Wanqing spent almost 2 weeks to prepare, while Guillermo was still cultivating his silver heartgrass in the yard. When the two had already left Luotsang and went to the desert, Guillermo was still preparing for food and equipment. Although she knew that Qi Wanqing hadn't contacted her own family for a long time due to the incident with the marriage, Qi Wanqing's cousin could no longer remain calm after hearing that they were preparing to explore the desert. In the military, they had connections and people would look after each other, but the desert was merciless and Qi Wanqing was going to the Taklamakan. It was dubbed the Sea of Death, and its ethnic name meant place where one could go in, but not go out. So Qi Wanqing's cousin started to wonder if the two girls were crazy, and why they would go to the Taklamakan for an adventure. So as soon as Qi Wanqing left with Ning Qingxue, she called Qi Wanqing's mother, Tang Champing. You state, Ning Qingxue's mother was talking to a girl in her 20s. What was intriguing was that the girl had a face cover and wore a pale yellow dress. However, her dress wasn't the same style as the modern-day style of young people. It seemed like a dress of an old era. This girl had long, black hair that was casually held up by a water blue clip, and a few loose strands of hair beside her ears gave her an out-of-the-world sense. Susu, this time, Qingxue was mortally wounded, and we had thought that she would die, but we didn't expect that she would suddenly be cured in a single night. Otherwise, I wouldn't have called you out. I know how hard it is for you to come out even once, Sai. Lan Yu regretted calling this woman out now because she knew it was hard for her to leave, so she couldn't bother her with trivial things. This time her daughter was heavily wounded, and thus Lan Yu thought about it before calling her out. However, she hadn't expected her daughter to be suddenly cured. She really would have had nothing to do if she still looked for trouble with the Song family when her daughter was perfectly fine. It doesn't matter, Sister Yu. If it hadn't been for you before, I wouldn't even be here anymore. Although I went to the hidden doors, I still remember Sister Yu's goodwill, so I would be able to come out a few more times for you, much less this once. Besides, something happened to Qingxue, so it is my duty to come and help her. As for that Song family, I will go have a look. The girl who had a face mask on had the voice of a charming bird, yet sounded spiritual. Just when Lan Yu wanted to stop Luo Susu from going to the Song family, Limume suddenly ran in and said, On to you, Qingxue went to the Taklamakan desert. When I called her, she had already arrived. I tried to convince her, but she said that she knew what she was doing and then actually shut her phone. Lan Yu suddenly stood up and spoke coarsely. What? You said that Qingxue went to the Taklamakan desert? What is she doing there? She said that she was going on an adventure with her friend. When I asked who she was going with, she only said that it was another girl. 2 girls going to the Taklamakan, this. Even Li Mumei didn't know what to say about Ning Qingxue. Taklamakan, many people have been lost there. Qingxue, this child, why can't she let me worry less? She was very good when she was in Beijing. But why did she change so much ever since coming to Ninghai? Sigh. Lan Yu suddenly sunk back into her seat, speechless. Hearing Lan Yu's words, Li Mumei deeply felt the same. The original Qingxue not only had her own opinion, but would never be impulsive for something. In the company, she organized everything and she would cooperate very closely. But ever since she married Guillermo, she changed too much, and now even Mumei could no longer understand Ning Qingxue, and didn't dare to guess what Ning Qingxue was thinking in her heart. Now, she was really naive sometimes. This was greatly discordant with the original Ning Qingxue, who would block a stick with their own body for a small blade of grass. Previously, she wouldn't have believed that Ning Qingxue would live alone at a far-off house by herself, or go to the desert no matter what. Had she fallen in love? They all say girls who were in love became foolish. The things they do are incomprehensible. However, Li Mumei didn't believe that Ning Qingxue would fall in love with someone either. Li Mumei still didn't know that Ning Qingxue went to Flowing Snake. If she did, she would have perhaps gone mad. Sister Yu, don't worry, I'll bring her back from there. Luo Susu suddenly stood up, speaking in a very soft tone. How can that work, Susu? Taklamakan is the sea of death. You can't go. It doesn't matter how strong you are. The dangers of nature aren't something a person could defend against. I'll tell her dad and get professionals to bring her out. Lan Yu immediately rejected Luo Susu's proposal. Don't worry, Sister Yu. Trust me. I can find her and bring her back. I'm going there. Luo Susu's tone was full of confidence. Just when Lan Yu wanted to respond, Luo Susu was already gone. Lan Yu looked at Luo Susu's back and eventually didn't say anything. She knew Susu. She would rarely talk, but when she did, she would do it. Aunt Yu, is she Aunt Susu? Li Mumei had always heard about this aunt, but had never seen her before. Lan Yu nodded. Luo Susu was a little girl that she had picked from the side of the road when she had just married and had gone to the temple to pray. Furthermore, because Lan Yu wasn't pregnant at the time, she had raised Luo Susu like her own sister. However, when she was just 5 years old, a friend of her father-in-law saw her and said that she had the root of wisdom and could enter the hidden doors. Then they took Luo Susu away. Luo Susu didn't like to talk much since she was young and grew to be extraordinarily pretty. Although Lan Yu didn't want her to go there, her father-in-law said the opportunity was extremely rare. Besides, Qingxue was already 2 at the time, so she listened to the words of her father-in-law. Unfortunately, not long after Luo Susu was gone, her father-in-law had died, and they've been disconnected from her since. It wasn't until 12 years later that she came back and told Lan Yu the way to contact her, and if they ever had any troubles, they could go to her. Weirdly enough, the last time she was wearing a mask too. Lan Yu also asked if Luo Susu could visit often, but she said that it wasn't easy. Although it was just one simple sentence, Lan Yu knew that it would be hard, so unless they had to, she wouldn't prefer to ask Luo Susu for help. This time it was because of Ning Qingxue that she thought about finding Luo Susu. It was customary for the boys to take the father's surname and the girl to take the mother's surname. So she gave Luo Susu her mother's surname, Luo. Luo Susu had a thick white scarf around her neck, showing only 2 eyes. People almost couldn't see her covered face, but her unique dress and astounding posture still attracted a lot of attention. There wasn't a direct plane to the Taklamakan Desert, so Luo Susu took the plane to Wulamuki and then changed there. At the airport of Korliai, not long after getting off, Ning Qingxue and Qi Wanqing were stopped. Ning Qingxue subconsciously took a few steps back. The experience at Flowing Snake gave her a deep impression. Dad. Qi Wanqing looked at the man who stopped her and called out. She hadn't seen her father for a few years, and this sudden meeting took her by surprise. Qi Yujun, who was planning to be furious, suddenly had his anger dissipate when he was called Dad. His serious face also relaxed and looked at the daughter he hadn't seen for 3 years. Wanqing, come home with Dad. Chapter 100. Stopped. Chapter 100. Stopped GMO had prepared everything and gave the task of caring for the silver heart grass to Yu Eru. He was prepared to go to the Taklamakan Desert. If he were successful this time and found large amounts of purple heart vine, then he would be able to reach the 3rd stage of Qi gathering, and as soon as he did, he would find Qianlong too, forcing him to hide to survive. Qianlong too had been marked by Yimo. He was a cultivator. If he could let it go, he wouldn't be Yimo. It was because of this that he desperately wanted to go to the desert and find the purple heartvine. Just when Emo was about to leave, Lu Xiaojin rushed in, her face full of worry. Lu Xiaojin was the new nurse Emo recruited. She had graduated from a nursing school and often liked to play with Eru, calling him brother under the same master. What? Emo looked at the anxious Lu Xiaojin and asked. Just then, Brother Yu took in a patient, but just diagnosed through feeling pulse and gave him a small cup of heart-appeasing serum. Then that man fell unconscious and started frothing. Lu Xiaojin said in one breath and was still puffing for breath. However, the worry on her face didn't lessen because if a small clinic caused the death of a patient, it would be different to a big hospital. The big hospital could deny, but the small clinic had to be fully responsible. Emo put down the bag he had packed and hurried over to the clinic. He had already told Eru not to take the troublesome patients. If they couldn't cure it, it would affect their reputation. But if they did manage to heal it, it would attract too much attention and wouldn't be good for Emo either. The clinic had opened for more than 20 days, and this was the first time this situation had arisen. Before arriving, Emo had already scanned with his spirit sense since the clinic was just in front of where Emo lived. When he came to the clinic, he saw Eru sweating, trying to save the man on the bed, and was obviously very worried. On the bed laid a man in his 40s, who still had froth coming out of his mouth, but his eyes were closed. Obviously, his condition wasn't light and should be out cold. Beside the man stood a teenage girl who looked like a high school student and another woman accompanied by a young man. Other than these three, 2 other people in the clinic seemed to be patients here, while 3 people were enjoying the show at the door. Eru, come down first. Emo, with only one glance, knew that Eru's method would not be able to save and wake up the man. Master, you're here. Hearing Emo's voice, he had finally calmed down. In his eyes, his master was capable of everything. Emo had already seen that the man being unconscious had nothing to do with the heart-appeasing serum. It was due to other reasons. So Emo didn't go there to treat him. He wanted to see first what the families would say. If they tried to blame it on him, then he wouldn't be nice anymore. Seeing Emo look over, the middle-aged woman rubbed her eyes and said, Doctor, my husband has always had this disease, so I don't blame you. I just heard that many people say that you could cure some incurable diseases. So I came to try my luck. However, I didn't expect my husband to have an outbreak again. Sorry, I'll call the ambulance right away. Emo sighed. This woman had a good character and didn't try to blame him like some other people would, which gave Emo a good impression of her. Her husband fainted in this clinic, and yet she was still the one to apologize to the doctor there. Emo remembered when he was in Ninghai, he had read in the newspaper that an old lady fell down, and someone tried to help her up, but she actually blamed that person for knocking her over and even wanted him to pay her compensation. Compared to that, this woman's characters was infinitely better, and Emo decided to save her husband just because of the woman's character. Thinking about this, Emo waved his hand and smiled. Don't call them. It's useless to go to the hospital unless you want them to do an open brain surgery on your husband. However, that would still be detrimental. Coincidentally, I have a way to cure this disease, so I'll look at it for him now. Ah. This woman was shocked on the scene upon hearing that Emo could cure her husband. Although her husband's disease wasn't incurable, it was very hard to cure. This was the conclusion they drew from seeing so many doctors. They came to this clinic because they had heard that as long as they took you in, you would be treated. Originally, they came to try their luck, and of course, Eru rejected to do any treatment. However, he was too kind-hearted. Seeing that this man was in pain, he gave him to drink a cup of heart-appeasing serum. But he didn't expect a problem to arise out of that. Eru wanted to help this man, so Lu Xiaojin hurried to get Emo. Although this woman knew her husband's problem, she hadn't called an ambulance because she had thought that Eru would be able to save him. However, she hadn't expected Eru to be unable to save her husband, even when his master came out. Thus, she decided to call the ambulance. Nevertheless, she would have never expected this younger-looking man to say that he could cure her husband and was immediately stunned. By the time she had reacted, Yi Mo was already saving her husband. Yi Mo's knew this man's disease with a scan of his spirit sense. His disease should be called a hereditary hemorrhagic telangiectasia, one which was a small pink-red spot in the blood vessels of his brain. Even open head surgery wouldn't be able to fully remove it and might instead cause more severe consequences. Thus, Yi Mo said that hospitals currently wouldn't be able to treat such disease. However, this disease only tortured people. They would feel headaches all seasons of the year, and the more time passed, the higher frequency it had. Although this disease wouldn't cause people to die immediately, it would be very hard to live over 50 years. An illness that was hard to treat for a hospital was very easy for Yi Mo. He only needed to pass his spirit chi into the brain through the needle and remove the red dots. This was even easier than curing the purple coral poison of that old man. After all, he was currently in the late phase of the second stage of chi gathering already. It had only been half an hour, but Yi Mo was already done. When he was finishing up, the man actually sat up. Everyone was stunned as they looked at Yi Mo and wondered how there could be such magical doctor. He had only needed half an hour to make a person who looked like he was about to die lively again. The man sat up and was in shock, but soon he reacted and touched his pain-free head with joy. That joy was so intense that he was ready to call Yi Mo Dad. A few decades of headaches suddenly disappeared. Anyone would be delighted. Miracle doctor! This man said, and was about to kneel down and bow his head. However, Yi Mo stopped him. I just happen to know how to cure this disease. If it had been some other illness, I wouldn't have a way. He showed too much of himself healing this man, so he quickly found an excuse. At this moment, both the wife and the 2 children understood that Yi Mo had really cured the man. The woman was so happy that she was going to kneel down with her husband. Nobody knew how much trouble this pain had brought upon their family. Yi Mo looked at this family full of gratitude and felt emotional. He thought that the sooner he killed Qianlong, the sooner he would be able to help people by curing some hard diseases. His simple actions could make a family happy for life. The reason that Yi Mo would be able to stand out in the open after finishing Qianlong was because if he could do so, the Song family wouldn't dare to do anything to him. He had already heard from Wu Xueming that Qianlong definitely had more power than the Song family. They were incomparable, and he believed Wu Xueming's words. If he had the power to kill Qianlong, the Song family would be wise if they didn't look for trouble. However, Yi Mo thought that if he could live without hiding, he wouldn't have the time to practice medicine either. So it seemed that he should teach his skills to Yu Eru. When Yu Eru learned everything, he would be able to cure people instead of him. Although Yi Mo didn't want to take too much money, the family still handed over $20,000. Yi Mo wasn't short on money now, and the clinic was going well, so he insisted on only taking $5,000. However, no matter how Yi Mo tried to explain that he just knew how to cure this disease, the clinic was still rising in fame and popularity. Nevertheless, Yi Mo didn't care about this. After briefing Yu Eru, he left for the desert. After getting off the plane, he found a distant place and recovered his usual appearance. He was about to go into the desert and didn't want to go in as Mo, so he switched back to Yi Mo. After all, if he was suspected of anything there, then he could use the identity of Moe to cover up. Yi Mo wasn't planning on taking the bus into the desert, as he didn't want anyone to know what he was doing. Besides, his cloud shadow step was not slower than cars, and actually it was much faster than cars in the desert. As soon as he had left Korliai, Yi Mo felt that he was being watched. He realized that it was 3 people, and although Yi Mo didn't know why they were monitoring him, this was at the border of the desert, so he wasn't worried at all. If he went into the desert, it would be very hard for them to find his track. You wait! One of the men rode on a motorbike and stopped Yi Mo. Seeing that Yi Mo had stopped, he asked, "There's a car, why don't you take it? Why are you running?" Then, He waved towards the two men behind him. One of them took out 2 photos, and as he looked at Yi-Mo, he frowned. Seeing this, Yi-Mo immediately knew he was suspected. He just didn't know what picture they were looking at. So what if I run? Move aside. Yi-Mo estimated that things would get dirty today. I can't tell about the face, but the figure looks really similar to Shering, and that man is called Yi-Mo, the person looking at the photo said. Take him away first, the man riding the motorbike said. At the same time, he took out a big knife from his bag. Notes: 1. If anyone is interested, it is not only in the brain. https://en Wikipedia org/wiki/hereditary_hemorrhagic_phalangiectasia. Chapter 101 The Battle in the Desert. Chapter 101 The battle in the desert in the east part of Africa, near the Somalia. There was an island called Nabin where Qian Longto's army was set. This place was close to the Arabian Sea, so they could enter the sea at any time, which was good to store an army. The place that Qian Longtu chose to reside in was not only good-looking, but had a surrounding mountain that shielded it from anyone's view. In any case, even if it weren't shielded, no one would be stupid enough to spy on Qian Longto's army. At this moment, Qian Longtu, who was at an extremely grandiose mansion, was roaring. His only son was killed inland, and now there was still no news of the killer. He had already ordered that if nobody could find the killer's whereabouts, then they should bring him the head of the government authority responsible for that area. However, just when Qian Longtu was getting more and more impatient, a soldier in charge of the communication suddenly ran in and reported, "Godfather, we have news of the killer." Qian Longtu liked people to call him Godfather because he had loved the American movie The Godfather. He often said that he would be better than him. Who? Right now, Qian Longto's greatest worry was that his son's killer wouldn't be found, and now that he heard the killer had been found, no matter how calm he was, he couldn't help but to ask immediately. If it had been anything else, he would sit without moving and wait until the soldier had finished his report. But since it involved his son's killer, he couldn't keep his calm anymore. We don't know the name of the killer right now, but his figure seems very close to Shering. We have already 3 brothers that have been killed by this man, and the way he kills is exactly the same, shooting metal nails into the forehead. It can be seen that this man is the same person as the killer at Ninghai. Our men must have found something special and went to ask, but were killed. The soldier reported everything he knew. Qian Longto's face kept changing, but didn't say a word. He knew that the soldier should still have something else to report. As expected, the soldier breathed and continued. After he had killed them and was prepared to destroy the evidence, the local police came. However, this person didn't seem to want to act against them, so he stole the motorbike and drove into the Taklamakan Desert. Our men have already followed him in. Immediately assemble every member of Nanqing. Capture him at all costs, even if it means flipping the desert, or just kill him and bring his head back as a sacrifice for Shiping. Qian Longtu interrupted the soldier's words and said immediately, Yi-Mo saw that these 3 people were identifying him through the photo and knew that if he were to let them go, his identity would be exposed. Since they still need to use the pictures, it meant that they weren't 100% sure that Yi-Mo was Shering. It didn't matter if his identity was exposed, but it couldn't be exposed now. Now he was still in the 2nd stage of Qi gathering, so it was not good for him if his identity was exposed. Once he reached the 3rd stage, he would be able to use many of the magical arts. Then it wouldn't matter. Since he knew that these 3 came to investigate him and were suspecting him, he immediately killed them without mercy. Although he knew they were either from the Song family or Nanqing, Yi-Mo wasn't sure which. However, at the pace the Song family should be investigating him, it shouldn't be them since they wouldn't have such influence, so these people were probably Nanqing's men. Thinking about Nanqing, Yi-Mo was also surprised. As soon as he showed his face, these people came charging over. Luckily, he stayed at home and rarely showed his face in Luotsang. Otherwise, he would probably have been discovered there. Yi-emo didn't have the slightest remorse in killing these three. Those who wanted his life needed to pay with their own. However, killing people in broad daylight required cleaning up. This wasn't Luoyu continent where no one cared if you killed someone. Just when Yi-emo was prepared to burn the three people, a police vehicle suddenly came over. He deduced that there was a fourth person who had run away and called the police, so now that he had been exposed, Yi-emo could no longer be bothered with destroying evidence. He rode on the motorbike and escaped into the desert. Although Yi-emo killed men from Nanqing, he didn't feel the slightest pressure at all. However, he still didn't want to attack the police, and without life-threatening situation, it was too significant to kill them. Yi-emo still wanted to stay here and didn't want to do such thing unless his life was in danger. Even if he had killed the police and removed the evidence there, he wouldn't have been able to seal the information shut since there was still a fourth person somewhere. Before Yi-emo came, he went through large amounts of information regarding the desert. He didn't plan to enter at this point, but he had no other choice. He knew that the most dangerous place was the cool lake near the outskirts, and many explorers had died here. The difference in temperature between day and night was tremendous, and usually explorers would never come here alone. When they did, it was with a big team. Yi-emo also found the names in coral, Luobu, Holy Door, but he wasn't sure if Luobu was the Luobu Lake. The map didn't point to the direction of Luobu Lake either. However, according to the data he had gathered, Taklamakan once buried large amounts of ancient cities, one of which was the famous Lulan city, who had also disappeared here. Many cities along the Silk Road have been buried by the desert in history. Yi-emo didn't know if the holy door he had to find was one of the ancient cities here. Yi-emo didn't rush into the desert. Although he was a cultivator, his state was very low, and now, not only he didn't have storage equipment, but he had strayed from the original route, so, after he had gone in the desert, he stopped moving forward. Instead, he took out the map and wanted to carefully determine his following route. Many people who came with many vehicles were eventually buried either in Luobu Lake or someplace else in the Taklamakan Desert. Yi-emo was only by himself now. All the water he had was carried in his bag. He was a far cry from those who had cars filled with water. Yi-emo originally thought that he had gone deep into the desert now and was very far from the nearest road, so those from Nanqing shouldn't be able to chase him here. However, Yi-emo once again underestimated the people from Nanqing. He quickly realized that he had been surrounded after only an hour or two since he had set up the tent. These people were really fast and actually chased into the desert. Yi-emo didn't have time to pack up his tent and just put his bag on and got ready to run. In the desert, there was no place to hide, and these 20 or so people had at least 10 guns. Although they didn't have any strong guns, and most of them were the same model, it was still enough to threaten Yi-emo. As though knowing Yi-emo's power, those people didn't hesitate to open fire as soon as Yi-emo came out. One person even threw a grenade. Obviously, these people's orders were to bring him back dead or alive. In the desert, Yi-emo didn't have another choice except to kill them all. At the same time he dodged the bullet, the metal nails flew out like flower petals. This wasn't the stone room in Flowing Snake. In this boundless desert, there were almost bullets flying from all directions. Yi-emo was sure that these people weren't from the Song family. They wouldn't be able to get this firepower. They were definitely from Nanqing. Qian long too managed to get more than 20 people in such a short time and more than 10 guns. It could be seen how powerful Nanqing was. If he had been at their base, then what would the scene be like? Yi-emo was starting to reconsider if he had the power to face Nanqing at their headquarters, even after he had reached the 3rd stage. However, he didn't have time to think because another 2 Range Rovers were heading their way. The car's engine could be heard during the battle, and Yi-emo knew that if he didn't finish this quickly, there would be more and more people. He felt some pain on his lower waist, and Yi-emo knew he had been shot. After all, his spirit sense range was still too small. He couldn't dodge the hidden shots. However, the person who shot him was killed by his nail at the next moment. When the Range Rovers were getting closer and closer, Guillermo had killed everyone who surrounded him before. However, he had also received a gunshot wound, and his tent was full of holes, which scared him a little. He didn't want another accident like this to happen. He had used a lot of chi in this battle. After all, he had to dodge bullets. He didn't think a long time before simply leaving his tent behind and quickly dashed into the depth of the desert. While running in the desert, Guillermo realized he had been a bit careless. He hadn't expected Nanqing to be this crazy, sending people into the desert to obstruct him. He couldn't even act according to his plan before taking a bullet. After 2 hours, Guillermo was completely lost. Although he knew it was very dangerous to be lost in the desert, this was still much better than tens of people with guns surrounding him. Guillermo stopped and treated his wound before realizing that at least 6 of the 20 bottles of spring water he had were pierced by bullets. The direction of the bullet was very weird. It shot through 6 bottles at once. Guillermo looked around. It was a boundless desert everywhere and a few occasionally dead trees. He cursed. Now he didn't even have a tent. If only he had a GPS. However, Guillermo didn't have the money to buy such a thing at all. Seeing that the sky was getting dark, Guillermo looked around, took out a sleeping bag from his bag, and barely hung it on the big tree. He needed to rest for the night. He just received a gunshot wound and hadn't completely healed yet. Now, there wasn't much water remaining, so he needed to conserve stamina and heal up. Chapter 102. Tear like Milan, white hair like silver sand. Chapter 102. Tear like Milan, white hair like silver sand. The night in the desert was relatively cool, and the calm breath almost made Guillermo forget that he was still in the desert. However, due to the disturbances of unknown bugs, Guillermo didn't get a very restful sleep. Despite this, Guillermo still felt pretty energetic when he woke up the next day. However, during the day, the searing heat of the sun made Guillermo feeling like he was in an oven, making him almost doubt if it was the same place from the previous night. The rolling heat wave attacked Guillermo, and this wasn't even in June. The weather was slightly cool, but the desert was so hot. It seemed that the temperature here was almost 45 degrees Celsius. If this was in June, would the temperature reach 100 degrees Celsius? Guillermo didn't dare to stay too long, although his wound was pretty much fine. The more he stayed in the desert, the more danger there was. Since he came, he needed to hurry up and go about his business. Although Guillermo found the words Luobu on the map, he didn't plan to go there immediately because the road he got on the map didn't point to that place and instead pointed somewhere else. However, after Guillermo had run for a day, he saw a vast empty place, surrounded by dunes. The sand rolled everywhere. Guillermo had done some research about the Taklamakan Desert and immediately knew this was the Luobu Lake. The temperature at day was near 50 degrees, but Guillermo could endure without it affecting him much. After all, he was a cultivator and was more resistant than ordinary people. However, he only had 9 bottles of water left, and he needed to find a water source fast. Otherwise, he would become dehydrated. Guillermo didn't plan to come to Luobu Lake first, but since he was already there, he didn't mind looking at it. After all, there were the words Luobu on the goatskin map. Although it was his first time coming here, Guillermo knew this was perhaps the most mysterious place in the desert, and many unexplainable events had happened here. Guillermo had made some research and discovered that countless people had been lost here. However, there was also a legend that everyone knew. Before Luobu Lake disappeared, it was called Immortal Lake. It was said that the wind god, in order to prevent his daughter Milan from being together with the mortal Luobu, gouged his eyes and broke Milan's legs before scattering them to the east and west side of the desert, making them forever apart. The two weren't able to see each other anymore, and the longingness for each other was like a sword which fastened their aging. In one night, the beautiful young girl Milan's hair turned white, and her rolling tears gathered and formed a river which converged to form a sparkling lake. This formed the fable of the Luobu Lake. Later on, it was said that Milan's yearning became a fatal sickness, and the night that she had died, the heavens changed, and the river went dry. The beautiful Luobu Lake had since disappeared, leaving behind this place full of silver sand which was said to be made from the young girl's white hair. This was the tearful story of Milan, her white hair and the silver sand. Yi Emo suddenly thought of this story when he was standing at the Luobu Lake. When he read the story before, he didn't have much reaction to it, but now, standing at the place where the story happened, he realized how melancholic this was. Separated by the heavens, reminiscence like the sword. Was this exactly like him and his master? He didn't know Luo Ying's feelings before, but now he did and finally understood what separated by the heavens and yearning like the sword felt like. When he was by Luo Ying's side every day, he didn't pay attention to it, but after leaving, he found that he had really lost something. Now that he was reborn on Earth, he realized how low his EQ was before. He couldn't even tell Luo Ying's feelings and could only feel he liked staying with her. However, when the danger came, the first thing Luo Ying thought about was to take him away. But when she activated the teleportation rune, he seemed to have felt a warm sensation brush past his neck. Now that Yemo thought about it, he realized what that warmness was. When Luo Ying activated the rune, she must have been discovered, and someone sneak attacked her. But in order to take him away, his master blocked this attack with her own body, and that warmness was the blood she had spat out. Yi Emo suddenly felt he hated himself. He only understood it now, but even then, what if he did? Could he see Luo Ying? If Luo Ying was still where she was before, would she think about him? Just like Milan's tear story, Yi Emo sat on a hardened dune and reminisced the bits and pieces of his memory with Luo Ying and felt immersed at the moment. It was unknown how long he was there before Yi Emo sensed danger. He moved out as quickly as he could, but there was nothing around him. It was as though his feeling before was wrong. Yi Emo frowned. His spirit sense clearly felt something was going to attack him, but now he scanned the surrounding 10 meters and found nothing. The day was already dark as it was almost 11 p.m. He had already been standing there for a few hours. Yi Emo decided to rest one night first and try to find a fresh water source nearby. However, due to his feeling before, he was much more alert. During the night, Luobu Lake was dead silent, but mysterious. Yet Yemo was a cultivator. He wouldn't feel much even if he slept at a graveyard, much less a desert. However, he had seen a ghost cultivator before. But he didn't believe there was such thing as ghosts on Earth, because if you weren't a cultivator, your soul would dissipate once you died. Meanwhile, most ghost cultivators were cultivators who had high power, but didn't want to enter samsara after death. So they used special artifacts to forcefully keep their soul in the cultivation world to cultivate. Although ghost cultivators could still become immortals when they reach the highest stage, almost no one could reach this stage. The silence didn't last long before a faint and distant shrieking sounded. But since Yi Emo knew that there were some animals in the desert, he didn't mind. However, the spirit chi was even more scarce in the desert, so Yi Emo couldn't cultivate. He could only sit beside a salt pile and rest. As such, he only rested for an hour before that feeling of being ambushed gushed in his heart again. Yi Emo took out a few metal nails and closely followed the thing that wanted to ambush him. Although he couldn't scan it, he felt it, as though feeling Yemo's vigilance. The thing that wanted to ambush didn't move, but just watched Yi Emo. At this moment, Yi Emo knew that his senses weren't wrong. He really was being watched by something, and this thing was very patient. However, it was outside the range of his spirit sense, and he could only feel it. However, Yi Emo wouldn't lose to anyone comparing patience. He often cultivated for more than a year, so a few hours was barely anything. Another hour passed, and the thing that hid in the darkness seemed to feel that it was being too careful. Who could discover it when it hid in the sand? It no longer hid and jumped up and rapidly aimed for Yemo's head. Its speed even reached Mach 1. However, Yemo could even dodge normal bullets, not to mention that he had his attention focused on this thing. So how could he let it attack his head? At that instant, he dodged and shot multiple nails out. A shrieking cry resounded, similar to the shriek of a mouse, but amplified many times. He knew that his nails had hit its target, and at this moment, Yi-Mo punched toward the dark shadow. However, Yi-Mo realized that his killing blow had missed. That dark figure had run away. But how could Yi-Mo let this dark figure escape after grasping its trail? He didn't even think before chasing. Yet, after chasing for more than 10 minutes, he still couldn't catch the dark figure. Seeing that this dark figure was faster than him, Yi-Mo threw out 2 fireballs. PSH, PSH! The fireballs hit the sand, blasting sand everywhere. But the black figure had disappeared. Yi-Mo just felt his head numb. He didn't believe in ghosts, but this unexplainable thing just happened in front of his eyes. He clearly saw his fireball land on the dark figure and just disappeared. However, he didn't believe that his fireball could turn the dark figure into nothingness. He wasn't that powerful yet. The surrounding was scarily quiet. The thing that screamed disappeared, and everything else was just the same. Yi-Mo calmed down. It was too late. Even if he wanted to find something, he had to wait until the next day. When Yi-Mo was prepared to come look again the day after, he suddenly realized he had lost his sense of direction. It had only been 10 minutes, but he was completely lost. At this moment, Yi-Mo felt the seriousness of the issue. When he chased the dark figure, he didn't think he would be lost at all, so he didn't carry his bag with him. All of his things were in his bag, so if he lost his bag, it would be a failure even if he managed to get out of here because there were some silver heart grass seed and the purple heart vine in there. Not to mention these things, he wouldn't last long in the desert without water, even as a cultivator. He needed to go back immediately and find his bag. However, Yi-Mo immediately rejected this idea. If he went back at this time, he could perhaps get farther and farther away, and eventually lose his bag forever. Chapter 103 Yellow-Clothed Woman. Chapter 103 Yellow-Clothed Woman. Yi-Mo calmed down his emotions and didn't continue looking for his bag. Instead, he simply sat down where he was. At this moment, he needed to be calm. Any bit of worry might make him take the wrong choice again. Previously, he definitely wouldn't have believed that he would get lost after chasing someone for only 10 minutes. It was said that the Taklamakan Desert was a bewilderment formation. Now it seemed that there really was one. Although he hadn't slept for the night, Yi-Mo was still full in spirit. The only thing he thought about in his heart was his bag. As soon as dawn approached the next day, Yi-Mo returned to where he had hit the black shadow with a fireball the night before and was amazed to see that the 2 marks he had made with the fireball had disappeared. There were no signs of movement on the sand, but the mark last night just seemed to have been washed by the sand again. Yi-Mo didn't want to waste time here. The scorching sun had risen up once again. If he couldn't find his bag quickly, losing things was insignificant, but losing his life wasn't an option. Although he was a cultivator, he was only in the 2nd stage of qi gathering and wasn't sure how long he could stay under this blazing sun. He couldn't pai-gu one or even eat nothing for a week, much less under such harsh conditions. He studied where he was for a long time before calculating a direction according to the sun and darting that way. A little more than 10 minutes later, Yi-Mo stopped. His direction was obviously not right. If it were right, he would have found where he had rested the night before at that point. When Yi-Mo returned back once again, he made the surprising discovery that the place he came back to didn't seem to be the same as before. However, the sand around him looked the same, and he couldn't really tell at all. Although he wouldn't get worried over this, Yi-Mo knew the situation was serious. Before, he didn't have a GPS, but he had a compass and some tools to tell the direction. But now, he didn't have anything at all and was lost. Yi-Mo knew that usually people who came to the desert would have some positioning tool with exact longitude and latitude. However, he didn't. He had originally thought that with his cultivation powers, this shouldn't matter much, but now he realized how wrong he was. But even if he had bought a cheap GPS, he wouldn't have kept it on him and would have probably left it in the bag. Now, Guillermo felt like he was stuck in a formation. Guillermo wasn't completely clueless about formation. He knew some formations, and as long as he had the material, he could set up hundreds of them. However, the place he was lost at didn't seem totally like a formation. Guillermo sighed as he thought that if only he had a storage equipment, then he wouldn't have to worry about losing his bag at all. Guillermo didn't run back and fro, and, in the end, just chose a direction and left. Since he was already lost, there was no point staying here. The following 2 days, Guillermo hadn't seen any signs of humans or animals. There were no water sources either. Under such scorching sun in the desert, if a normal person ran around like Guillermo, no matter how strong he was, he would have been gone already. Even Guillermo started to feel that he couldn't take it anymore. And if he continued like this, perhaps it would only be a few days before he would be devoured by the desert. Living for 3 days and 4 nights without drinking or eating, Guillermo felt the chi in his body withered, and yet he had no way to cultivate here. The 5th day, Guillermo, who had cracked dry lips, seized any intentions of finding a water source. He was unfamiliar with the desert. He wouldn't know what place should have water. If he didn't meet any people or water, he would be in a dangerous situation. But if he didn't keep searching, he would be baked under the sun and wouldn't last much longer as well. He could only dream to be in the 3rd stage right now. Guillermo felt helpless. His powers were still too weak. Just as he was thinking, Guillermo suddenly noticed the sand under his feet seemed to be flowing slowly. However, that speed was very slow, and if Guillermo didn't have spirit sense, he would definitely be unable to tell. Guillermo focused again and found that all the sand gradually flowed to a position under his feet. However, there was no sand building up there. What was happening? No buildup of sand. This meant that all the sand had disappeared under the ground. Disappeared under the ground? Guillermo was startled. Since it disappeared under the ground, it meant that the ground below him should be empty. Thinking about this, he no longer dared to remain here. He had already used as much power as he could. So if there was a sand whirlpool suddenly, he wouldn't have the means to escape. But just as Guillermo was thinking about this and wanted to leave, the sand under his foot suddenly started to spin. Guillermo felt it was hollow under his foot and he was about to sink in. Guillermo knew clearly that if he was taken away by the sand, he would die with his current state. He didn't want to be taken in by the sand. He stood on the sand and jumped flying about 5 to 6 meters in the air. But soon he felt something was wrong. Although he jumped up, the suction under his foot was still there and he didn't have any landing spot. A few days ago, perhaps he would have been able to dash out of the whirlpool with a burst of power. But now he could only watch as he slowly went down. Even if he used his chi to the maximum, he could only at most slow down the speed of descent. The chi in his body was no longer enough to support him moving around. Guillermo sighed. He didn't expect that he would die like this in the desert. At this moment he thought of many things. Luo Ying's smile and voice circulated around him, and also what Ning Qingxue had said that night. The things I left in the garden are for Guillermo. He was stunned for the moment. Just when Guillermo was about to accept the fate of being devoured by the sand, he suddenly felt his waist tighten as a white strand of clothes twisted around his waist. Although he was stunned briefly while being devoured by the sand, he wouldn't let such opportunity pass. He immediately grabbed the strand, and just when he was prepared to pull himself out, he felt his waist tighten, and he was flung up. When he fell on the hard sand ground, the white strand was taken back. Guillermo was astonished. This person's ability was a level higher than the Huqiu he met last time. Who was this person? Standing 10 meters away from Guillermo was a woman with a pale yellow dress. She had a cloth covering her face and was staring at Guillermo right now. Her eyes were clear and vibrant, giving people a sense of serenity. It was actually such a woman, and she still wore a dress in the desert? If Guillermo weren't a cultivator, he would have thought this woman was a goddess. However, Yemo obviously wouldn't believe so. Although he couldn't see her face, the temperament and body of this woman were already indescribable. The faint yellow dress stood under the blazing sun without moving at all, as though she was an eternal goddess. However, the backpack behind her also told people that she wasn't a goddess. She was also someone who came to explore the desert. Her hair was a bit messy, but the few black strands that came out made her feel like a goddess even more. Looking at her, Yemo seemed to see his master Luoing, who was just standing in front of him. He couldn't help but call out, "Master!" It was at that instant that he felt he was in love with this woman. This was the first woman that he actually fell in love with other than Luoing. Even for Luoing, he only realized his dependence later on. This woman looked at Yemo's messy look, who didn't have anything with him. Then when she heard Yemo mumbling "Master," she couldn't help but frown, but that was it. She didn't say anything. Yemo had come to his sense. He already understood that the woman in front of him was no ordinary woman. Otherwise, she wouldn't be coming to the desert dressed like this. He turned around and looked at the whirlpool, but it had already disappeared. He knew this woman had saved his life and also realized his impoliteness, so he quickly saluted with his fists and said, "Thank you, sister, for saving my life." "Sister." The woman seemed to be stunned at the way Yemo called her. She saw Yemo almost drown in the quicksand and knew his bag was probably devoured by the sand, but she still didn't say anything. She just took out a bag of water and biscuits and threw it to Yemo. Yemo took the things, but didn't open the bag to drink first. Instead, he saluted with his fists once again and said, "Thank you for giving me water. If I, Yemo, don't die, I will pay you back." The woman looked at Yemo's actions and didn't say anything. However, she felt weirder. She saw that Yemo's lips were dry, so obviously he hadn't drunk water for a long time. Normally, someone who hadn't drunk water for a long time in the desert would dash and drink to their heart's content when they saw water. However, this man, although looking a bit shabby, didn't have any worry of being devoured by the sand. He even seemed calm and talk in a very literate way. Yemo saw this woman just look at him, but didn't talk. However, he didn't mind. He could tell that this woman didn't live in the city. Otherwise, she wouldn't be dressed like this. He had already thanked her, so he opened the bag and drank more than 10 mouthfuls. However, he didn't stick his mouth to the bag and poured it down instead. Did he mind her? She hadn't drunk from the bag, but seeing Yemo's way of drinking, she felt more surprised. He was so thirsty, but he only drank a little more than 10 mouthfuls. This person's self-control and heart were really stable. However, what took her even more by surprise was that Yemo passed the water bag back. This woman frowned. Of course. She wouldn't take back something she gave out, especially after Yemo had drunk from it. Although he didn't touch his mouth with it, she still didn't want it back. Suddenly, this woman wondered if this man had planned to give the bag back to her after drinking, which was why he didn't touch it with his mouth. He was in the desert without water, but he still was able to give this bag of water back to her. Notes: 1. Paigu, the state where the cultivator no longer needs to rely on food for energy. Chapter 104. Kulu. Chapter 104. Kulu the woman hadn't realized that Yemo had scanned her bag with a spirit sense, but other than a few simple girls' items, there were only a few bags of biscuits and these 2 bags of water. The other one only had a bit more than a half. Regardless of who this woman was, Yemo felt respect for her for the fact that she could give more than half of her water to a stranger. He was a cultivator, so with these 10 mouthfuls of water, he should be able to find his bag after asking for directions from this woman. He didn't want to endanger that woman's life because of the water, since no matter how strong she could be, she wasn't a cultivator that could use chi to recover. Without water, she may be worse off than him. Seeing that this woman looked at him without speaking, Yemo just felt a little confused and wondered if this woman was mute, which would be too unfortunate. How could such a stunning woman be mute? I just lost my bag. Can you tell me how to head to the center of Luobu Lake? Seeing that this woman didn't talk, Yemo could only explain himself. The woman took out a small round disc and looked at it before suddenly pointing a direction. Then she turned and left. However, she didn't take back the food and water Yemo tried to pass back. From the moment this woman had saved Yemo and gave him directions, she hadn't said one word. So he wasn't sure if she didn't want to talk or couldn't. Seeing the woman disappearing, Yemo felt like he had lost something. He had seen a lot of beautiful women. Ning Qingxiwe, Qi Wanqing, Su Jingwen, even Yinbing was very beautiful. But he had never seen someone like this woman who made him lose a part of his soul. Yemo followed the direction she pointed and sprinted over. He didn't expect to find that place in less than half a day. The place that he had looked so hard for a few days was so actually close. Yemo was speechless. However, when Yemo came back to his resting place, he realized that his bag had disappeared. People had come here these few days, and Yemo saw some of their messy footprints and immediately knew his things were taken. He followed the footprints and just walked 100 to 200 meters before finding 2 utility cars behind a dune, and 4 Caucasians were sitting under a tree, eating. His bag was tossed aside, and one of them was looking at Yemo's porcelain bottle which contained his pills inside. Yemo walked over and packed his bag, but the model Wendong gave to him was missing. Yemo immediately scanned with his spirit sense and found it lying inside one of the cars, covered in a box. It seemed these people also knew that it was worth quite a lot. Seeing Yemo pick the bag up, one of the men immediately came and spoke for a long time. Yemo had learned some simple English in Ninghai University, so he could understand, but he couldn't be bothered to respond. These people took his things and asked why he was taking it back. "Who are you?" "This bag is ours. Why are you taking it?" That man holding the bottle reproached aggressively toward Yemo. He actually spoke fluent Chinese. Yemo immediately grabbed the bottle from his hand and put it back in his bag. He sneered, "Yours? I left it 200 meters over there. How is it yours?" This foreigner was still going to speak, but the person next to him stopped him and spoke in English. "Mac, since this bag is his, let him take it. We don't lose anything." Then he signaled, and this man called Mac immediately stopped. Yemo knew what they were thinking. But why would he let them do as they wish? Wendong gave that model to him. Although he didn't have any use for it, he didn't want to leave it to a few bad-looking people. Originally, these few people didn't think Yemo had noticed his model was gone. But they saw Yemo walk straight toward one of the cars and open the case containing the model. He took out the model and the information before dumping it on the ground. How did he know it was in the car? These few foreigners were still thinking when Yemo had already stashed the things inside. The 4 men reacted and immediately stopped Yemo, solving things the hard way. Yemo sneered and used a swirling wind kick and sent the foreigners flying out meters away. Then he looked bleakly at them. "If you dare to come again, I won't go easy anymore." The 4 looked at each other and watched as Yemo just walk out of there. They didn't dare to speak anymore. Although Yemo thought it would be best to kill these 4, he thought it would be overreacting for killing these people when they just took a bag in the middle of nowhere. However, when Yemo didn't walk far, he suddenly remembered something and walked back once again. "You, what do you want?" "We already gave it back to you," the man who could speak Chinese asked worriedly. Yemo ignored him and just took a map of the desert from the car. He didn't have one, so with this he would be able to find a way back, even if he ended up being lost again. He looked at the GPS that seemed to be charging in the car. Yemo pulled it off, but it was immediately out of power. He thought and chucked it back. Then he took another foldable backup tent and 10 bottles of water into his bag. Seeing Yemo just take those few men felt relieved. But then something that made them worry happened again. Yemo actually took some silver pieces in the car. What took Yemo's attention wasn't their worth, but because it had the Tibetan character door. Could the letter before it be holy? Yi Mo knew these foreigners came to the Taklamakan to make a fortune. They were looking for these artifacts. The relevant departments wouldn't even care if they took it. Yi Mo couldn't be bothered with these things, but with that character, Yi Mo immediately took it seriously. Seeing Yi Mo just take one piece and left the other things untouched, these few foreigners felt relieved once again. The piece didn't worth much. "Where did you find this silver piece?" Yi Mo waved it in front of the foreigners and asked. The foreigners looked at each other but didn't talk. Yi Mo sneered and spoke once again. "If you don't want to speak, fine, but I see there are a lot of good things on your car. I don't mind driving your car away. Oh, by the way, I could make a fire with the remaining car." As soon as Yi Mo spoke, the man who could speak Chinese immediately said, "I know." Hearing these words, Yi Mo threw the map over and said, "Show me the location on this map. If there is the slightest difference with mine, I'll make sure you won't leave the desert." "It's already marked on the map," the man spoke quickly. Yi Mo opened the map and indeed saw a place marked with a few English words. Before Yi Mo asked what it meant, the man explained, "We found the silver pieces there because we had found a stone tablet marked with Kulu. So we called that place Kulu." The man didn't seem like he was lying, so Yi Mo took the map and didn't bother with these few people. He took out his simple map and compared. He made the surprising discovery that this Kulu was the exactly same place marked in his goatskin map. Kulu was probably what he was looking for. Yi Mo suppressed the joy in his heart, thinking whether this Kulu was the Ku Lake or not. Yi Mo needed to get there quickly, and the map he took from the foreigners were much more precise than his map. Everything was marked clearly on the map. Seeing Yi Mo didn't take their car, they finally felt relieved. China's kung fu was too magical. That man just kicked, and they all flew. Yi Mo believed that these guys were preparing to go back. They didn't have much equipment on their car. Since he had a map and simple navigation equipment, he would be much faster than a car in the desert. After all, there were many places a car couldn't go. Although he had a map and the precise location, Yi Mo wasn't in a rush. He knew he couldn't be hasty if he wanted to find that place, and he needed to keep his calm. He thought about what happened a few nights before and knew that the black shadow that attacked him was definitely a type of animal in the desert. As for why he would lose his way, he still couldn't understand. But one thing was for sure, he hid his nails. Thinking about the disappearing shadow and fire marks, as well as the whirlpool that almost made him lose his life, Yi Mo connected these things together. He wondered if the place he had sat before was also gradually falling, and that caused the marks to disappear. However, thinking that he was sitting at a place where sand fell down, no matter how strong Yi Mo's heart was, cold sweat slowly fell down his spine. He then thought about the goddess-like woman who saved him. Who was she? In order to conserve his stamina, Yi Mo didn't run. He chose to walk during the day and rest at night. Ever since he had met the whirlpool that day, Yi Mo was very cautious. When he rested, he would make sure he found a good place. On the third night after acquiring the map, Yi Mo stopped at a wall that had been ruined by the sand. He was preparing to rest here for the night before continuing. Chapter 105. The Person Trapped in the Desert. Chapter 105. The person trapped in the desert at this moment. Qi Wanqing and Ning Qingxue had already entered the desert. However, they didn't come by themselves as originally planned. Instead, there was a whole vehicle crew. Although Qi Wanqing didn't want her father intervening, her father didn't bring up about anything in the past this time and allowed her to enter the desert. Thus, she could only retreat a step. Besides, she knew that her father was doing it for her sake. With her compliance, Qi Yujun not only arranged a few cars for Qi Wanqing, but also sent people to go with her in the desert. This was using his authority for private matters. But if it hadn't been for his daughter, Qi Yujun would have never done such thing. However, he had no choice. The daughter he hadn't seen for a few years was going to the desert, and no matter how he had tried to persuade her, she wouldn't agree. He didn't want to have a big fight again, so he could only comply and send people to protect her. Yi Emo carefully inspected the wall he was sleeping at overnight. Feeling that it was very sturdy, he was assured and opened up the tent. It would be too hot for sleeping bag at night, so he didn't bother pulling that out. At night, Yi Emo didn't want to sleep. He was cultivating outside the tent, but by midnight he felt he was being watched again. This feeling made him very uncomfortable, and he felt more weird. He wasn't the only person to come to the desert, but why did this only happen to him? Yi Emo didn't continue waiting this time. He packed his things into the bag and carried his bag. He felt that the thing that was watching him stayed where it was. He wasn't sure if it was the same thing from last night, but since he was being watched, it meant that there was something attracting it from him. As for what it was, he didn't know. Was it still a bare cockroach watching him? Yi Emo knew this was impossible because it wouldn't be able to survive in the desert. He came to the desert to find the purple heart vine. Did this thing come because of the purple heart vine in his bag? Because other people didn't have it, only he did. If that was the case, this would mean that the thing was sensitive to the purple heart vine. After Yi Emo put on his bag, he wasn't in a rush to attack this thing. Instead, he took out a metal nail and marked it with his spirit sense before suddenly standing up and walking away from the wall. At the same time, he shot the nail towards the black shadow. CHHH. Yi Emo knew he hit his target and immediately chased. This time he had everything with him, so he wasn't afraid of getting lost. With his food and water as well as his powers, he would be able to survive a month or two in the desert without problems this time. Yi Emo didn't lose it. He followed closely behind. Although the shadow was on the border of escaping his spirit sense range, he had marked it with a nail. Yi Emo believed that as long as his spirit sense focused the nail, he would be able to catch that shadow. Although Yi Emo followed the shadow closely, he felt intrigued about the shadow's stamina. He was sure his nail hit it, but how was it still able to run so fast? The shadow that attacked him a few days ago was like this as well. Just when Yi Emo was thinking of a way to speed up and catch the shadow, a feeble cough sounded from the distance. The sound was so small that if his hearing wasn't great, he definitely wouldn't be able to hear it. Just phasing for this moment, Yi Emo lost track of the black shadow. However, Yi Emo wasn't annoyed. That black shadow must have gone hiding somewhere. The black shadow was shot by the nail. Even if it took the nail out, he worked the nail and would be able to find it with the spirit sense mark. It would be fine at least within a few hours. Now that the thing disappeared, Yi Emo couldn't be bothered finding it. He just followed where that moan was before. 2 men and a woman leaned weakly against a tattered tent. Yi Emo's spirit sense scanned them before he even went there. The 3 had messy and dirty hair and looked very shabby. The 2 men actually carried guns with them. Although that woman didn't have a gun, there was ferocity in her expression. Yi Emo seemed to have seen this ferocity somewhere. Looking at the position they were sitting, it was obvious these 3 weren't in the same group. Although they all looked like they were about to die, the 2 men still stared vigilantly at the woman as if preventing her from playing any tricks. As soon as Yi Emo arrived, the 3 were immediately frightened. It was in the middle of the night in the desert, and a figure suddenly appeared. No matter how brave they would still be frightened. Although they were shocked, it was obvious they had no strength left to get up. However, one of them pointed a gun at Yi Emo, but didn't fire. Yi Emo noticed their cracked lips and their sandstorm, tattered clothes. It was obvious they had been in the desert for a while. "Who are you?" A person holding a gun asked nervously at Yi Emo. "Are you a human or a ghost?" The woman looked very threatening. But how could she not be afraid seeing a person carrying a bag in the middle of the night in the desert? She subconsciously moved toward those 2 men. But perhaps she was out of energy, so she only moved a little bit. "Who I am is not important, but if you continue to point a gun at me, I'll guarantee you won't see tomorrow's sun," Yi Emo said faintly. He hated people pointing guns at him. And these three didn't look like ordinary people. Even when they were fatigued by the desert, he could still feel their ferocity, whether it was the woman or the two men. To Yi Mo's surprise, the person suddenly took the gun back and coughed before saying tiringly, "I hate the morning sun right now." Yi Mo suddenly felt this person was a bit cute and smiled. "You are lost in the desert." At this moment, the three could be sure Yi Mo wasn't a ghost. He should be someone exploring the desert. The man who packed the gun away also felt relieved. Perhaps they could be saved by this person. At this moment, he didn't ask Yi Mo for water and said admiringly, "Brother, I really admire you. You can survive in the desert as if you were taking a stroll. Don't tell me you came here on foot." Yi Mo didn't answer the man's words and looked at the other two. The man explained, "I'm Li Hu, and this is my partner in crime, Cheng Hongja. We were apprehending a criminal in the desert, but we lost our way. Our car is out of oil, so we dumped it in the desert. We wanted to ask for backup, but our communication and GPS were all useless. Then we walked some distance trying to find a place with signal, but it was worse. We are still lost, and it has already been many days now." Seeing Yi Mo didn't talk, Li Hu took out his phone and said, "Originally, I thought we could still call for help even if we were lost, but a few days later, the phone was out of battery. Plus, in order to capture her, we went into the desert in a hurry and basically didn't prepare anything. Although we caught her, but we're trapped in the desert and probably will die in a day or two." This Li, who seemed to be free-spirited and didn't take death seriously. Yi Mo looked at the woman, thinking that although she had been tortured by the desert to the point that she couldn't move, her ferocity was still there. Since they were capturing criminals, it meant these two were from the police or another department like that. "Shameless, you two are the criminals. Is that thing yours? What right do you have to get it from me? Besides, it's not even on me," the woman immediately rebutted, and her tone was rather contemptuous. Yi Mo couldn't be bothered with these things. He didn't care who was right or wrong. Seeing these three unable to sustain much longer, he took out 15 bottles of water and gave 5 to each. Since these three weren't from the same group, he would give it to them separately in order to avoid conflict. He didn't give them food since he had seen some food in their bags. "Thanks, brother, I don't need this much." "3 are fine. You are still in the desert. Keep some for yourself." Li Hu took some water and thanked him immediately. Yi Mo gave them water because he had found a lot, and another reason was because that yellow-dressed woman was generous when saving him. He felt he was affected too. Of course, Yi Mo liked Li Hu's personality. This person was optimistic. Now that he told Yi Mo to keep some, Yi Mo had a better impression of him. Cheng Hongja took the water and thanked Yi Mo, but didn't say the water was too much. He quickly opened a bottle and drank everything. He looked at the remaining water and didn't continue drinking. He knew he couldn't drink too much now. The woman took the 5 bottles and thanked Yi Mo excitedly. "Thank you, you are a really good person. I'm called Feng Tian, and I only need 3 bottles too." Then she gave 2 bottles back to Yi Mo. Yi Mo waved his hand. "I still have 10 bottles. You don't need to give it to me. I have enough." However, he felt Feng Tian's temperament didn't match with her name, One. She looked ferocious, but her name was very docile. Cheng Hongja saw that out of the 3, he was the only one to not say anything and drank first. He felt quite awkward. Li Hu drank half a bottle and felt that he had recovered a lot. Then he looked at Feng Tian and said, "Okay, you say you're not a criminal, but do you dare to say you weren't from Beisha? You dare to say that the explosion in Tandu a few months ago was unrelated to you? Are you still going to say you didn't take that thing? We already said, as long as you give me that, I can even give you payment and won't look for trouble. Besides, do you even need it?" Feng Tian opened her mouth, but eventually didn't say anything. Note 1. Tian means sweet. Chapter 106. Chase. Chapter 106. Chase. Yi Mo suddenly understood. The explosion a few months ago at Tandu was done by Wendong and him. Back then, he had heard Gong Huishan say that Wendong was from Beisha, although Yi Mo didn't know what kind of organization it was. Now that Li Hu said that Feng Tian used to be in Beisha too, he finally understood why he felt that familiar feeling from her. It was because of Wendong. Yi Mo looked at Li Hu and suddenly smiled. You actually accused wrongly Feng Tian this time because first, she doesn't have what you're looking for, and second, she hadn't even tried to take it. Yi Mo didn't tell them about the explosion a few months ago. He only helped Feng Tian because she was indeed innocent and hadn't exposed Wendong. Besides, Li Hu also said that if she had taken it out and gave it back, she wouldn't be held responsible and would even be rewarded. Nonetheless, this thing was kind of useless to Yi Mo. How do you know? Do you know what we're looking for? Li Hu just recovered some strength after drinking water. He stood up, but his body was still weak. Yi Mo waved his hand. You don't need to know how I know, but since you mentioned a reward for this thing, we could make a deal. It doesn't matter even if I sell it to you. My friend doesn't need it anyway. Li Hu immediately called out in surprise. Of course we agree, definitely. Name a price. We will definitely accept it. He didn't even say that Yi Mo couldn't ask for too much. From this, it could be seen how important this thing was to him. Besides, he probably knew that if Yi Mo could give water to strangers in the desert, he definitely wouldn't be some nasty person. Before Yi Mo could respond, Feng Tian yelled in surprise, do you know where Sister Dong went? The hope in her eyes was obvious. This I don't know. Yi Mo could tell that not only Feng Tian came from the same organization as Wendong, but they seemed to have left it together, and their relationship was quite good. Hearing Yi Mo's words, Feng Tian's eyes flashed with a sliver of disappointment. Yi Mo, however, turned around and gave a look of approval to Li Hu, thinking that his name didn't match with his character. Seeing Li Hu looking desperately at him, Yi Mo smiled. How much can you give? $500,000, Li Hu said. Feng Tian immediately rebutted. This thing could easily sell for a few million on the international market. How can you even say 500,000? Li, whose eyes flashed with guilt after hearing Feng Tian's words. For him, 500,000 was the highest he could give. After all, his department wasn't the same as those foreign departments. He also understood his price was absurdly low, perhaps not even 10% of its worth. Yi Mo could tell from his expression that 500,000 was probably the highest price Li Hu could afford. Anyway, he really didn't need it, and it took up a large space in his bag, which annoyed Yi Mo quite a bit. Since he had a good impression of Li Hu, he wouldn't waste time, that he surely didn't have, haggling on a model that was useless to him. Now, his main purpose wasn't to earn money, but of course it was always good to have money, and Yi Mo was very satisfied if he could get $500,000 out of nowhere. In fact, 500,000 is indeed a bit low. How about I give another 200,000? Li Hu said awkwardly. Cheng Hongzhe suddenly interrupted. Li Hu, where are you going to get another 200,000? Are you going to use your own money? Before Li Hu replied, Yi Mo waved his hand and said, Okay, 500,000 is good. I'll sell it to you. Then Yi Mo took out that model and the information and passed it to Li Hu. You're talking about this, right? Li Hu was stunned as he had never expected things to be so successful. Feng Tian, who hadn't expected that it would be on him, was also surprised Li Hu finally understood and took it as if he were dreaming. He flashed it with a torch and said, Yes, it's this, thank you. I really didn't expect to find this in the desert. However, I don't have any money with me. Even Li Hu felt embarrassed himself. Although this was very important to him, it still didn't belong to him. He couldn't just speak empty words. However, Yi Mo smiled and said, Then you owe me. Leave me a number, I'll call you when I get back, and you'll give the money to me then. What? Not only Li Hu was shocked, but even Feng Tian and Cheng Hongzhe were surprised and wondered how someone could have so much trust when doing business. Li Hu really didn't know what to say. He could tell Yi Mo wasn't an ordinary person, but he didn't expect him to be so trustful. He didn't ask how Yi Mo got the thing, because he didn't want to know the details. Everyone had their own secrets, and since this person trusted him so much, he shouldn't be too curious about it. After thinking about it for a moment, Li Hu saluted. Friend, I, Li Hu, won't be too polite with you since it doesn't only concern me, but we are definitely friends now. I also want to ask for your name. Otherwise, I wouldn't know who to give the money to. I'm Yi Mo. Yi Mo didn't hide his name. Wen Dong already knew it anyway, and the Song family should be aware of his presence here too. Yi Mo. Li Hu repeated, but didn't think about it too much. Then he said, My number is 13817XXXX, Beijing. Suddenly, Li Hu stopped because he realized Yi Mo had already disappeared. Only a bottle and a compass were left behind. Immediately after, a voice reverberated. There are 3 pills in the bottle. Take 1 each, and you will recover soon. Goodbye. Li Hu picked up the bottle and thought for a long while before saying, Brother, Yi is really a magical person. Then he opened the bottle and looked at the 3 black pills. Can this thing even be eaten? Cheng Hongzhe looked at the pills and frowned. As long as Brother Yi gave it, I believe they are edible. Then Li Hu ate 1 without hesitation. Feng Tian sneered and also took 1 from Li Hu's hand. Only Cheng Hongzhe was hesitating as he looked at the remaining pill. Afterward, Feng Tian stood up with a face full of surprise. She whipped her hair and said joyfully, There are actually such magical pills. If you don't want this, give the remaining 1 to me. Then she tried to take the remaining pill in Li Hu's hand. Li Hu was also surprised. He thought that this pill was so magical. He only took 1, and he immediately felt his fatigued body recovering. Seeing Feng Tian trying to snatch it, of course, he didn't give it to her, and instead threw it to Cheng Hongzhe. Quickly eat it. Recover your strength, and we will leave the desert immediately. Then he looked at the direction Yi Mo disappeared before mumbling once again. Brother, Yi is really a magical person. He could possibly be from one of the ancient martial arts families. Only they would have such magical pill, and only they would be able to walk in the Taklamakan desert so casually. Yi Mo didn't have time to talk with them because he had felt that black shadow again. He wanted to know what this thing was, and if it was sticking with him for the purple heart vine. Of course, Yi Mo only looked for 10 minutes or so and finally saw another obscure black shadow. Although it was very fast, Yi Mo's wasn't slow either. The black shadow looked like the root of a tree, and Yi Mo even wondered if it had transformed from a tree root. Even though Huyang trees were said to live for millennia, Yi Mo knew his idea was too otherworldly. Yi Mo was so focused on chasing the black shadow in front of him, he didn't even look at the direction or notice his path. However, this time he had his bag with him and didn't need to worry about this. He didn't believe that a desert could devour a cultivator with supplies. So a few hours later, when the sky was getting brighter, Yi Mo could already start to see what was in front of him. That black figure really was a Huyang tree root. The sky was bright, and Yi Mo wouldn't worry about this thing getting away. But now, when this thing was right in front of Yi Mo, it suddenly disappeared again. If it wasn't for the fact that Yi Mo had been prepared and left a spirit sense mark on the nail, he would have lost it again. At this moment, Yi Mo had finally understood. No wonder it kept appearing and disappearing when he chased it the night before. This shadow could travel through the sand, and without the mark, he couldn't keep up with it. And now that Yi Mo understood, he wouldn't let it go. This thing was extremely fast in the sand too, but Yi Mo kept a tight chase. He refused to believe that he couldn't chase up an animal in the desert. This shadow not only had a strong life force, but stamina as well. After playing tag with Yi Mo in the desert for the entire day, it finally slowed down. Yi Mo also gasped a breath. He was feeling tired. He took out a bottle and drank it clean. Suddenly, Yi Mo was dumbfounded. Originally, he knew this thing was deep in the sand, so he was still able to track it down. But now this shadow appeared to have understood Yi Mo and went deeper and deeper into the sand, until it gradually reached out of Yi Mo's maximum detection range. Yimo's spirit sense mark could be felt at most within 50 meters. But now this shadow went more than 50 meters underground, and eventually Yimo lost the shadow completely once again. Yimo stood depressed at where the shadow dug down and was very annoyed. He was wondering if he should dig open here and look, but it was too dangerous to dig randomly in the desert. He still had a clear memory of the danger when he almost sunk into the desert. Note, 1, who means fox here. Chapter 107, Underground Desert. Chapter 107, Underground Desert. Yimo really didn't want to give up something he had been chasing for a whole day and night. But now he knew it was hiding underground, and there was nothing he could do. If only he were in the third stage chi gathering, he wouldn't hesitate to dart into the desert. In the third stage, he wouldn't be afraid of being thirsty because he would be able to use the most important magic of all, water ball art. With the water ball art, he would be able to convert spirit chi into water, and as such, he would never have to worry about dying of thirst. Furthermore, in the third stage, he wouldn't die even if he didn't breathe for a whole month in the desert. Unfortunately, one level difference was huge. This was a milestone. This black shadow was targeting him. Yimo came to the conclusion that it was definitely his purple heart vine that attracted it, because other than that, he brought the same thing as everyone else. It was only the purple heart vine that other people didn't have. However, this thing was quite sneaky. He could think of killing Yimo first before taking his stuff. Then, Yimo suddenly thought of something important. He had been chasing this black shadow for a whole day. But why did it only crawl into the depth now? According to its cunningness, it should have thought of this idea long ago. What did this mean? It meant that it could only crawl in at specific locations. Thinking about this, Yimo immediately rejoiced. This place looked the same as any other part of the desert, but there were too many mysterious remains buried underneath, including all those ancient cities lost in the flow of time. Perhaps this place was a tunnel towards an underground city, and maybe the whirlpool he fell into last time was also a tunnel towards an underground city. Sigh. Thinking about it, Yimo felt a little disappointed again for not being in the third stage yet. Yimo set his gaze on his bag. He still had 10 bottles of water, plus the bag of water the yellow-clothed woman gave to him, and all the pills Yimo had made. With these, he would be fine even if he was buried for half a month under the sand. What was he afraid of? He came for the purple heart vine in the desert. Since that thing also came for it, it meant that I had seen it before. Otherwise, it wouldn't be so sensitive. Let's go inside. As soon as Yimo made up his mind, there was no stopping him. He took out a shovel from his bag and started to dig where the black shadow disappeared. Sand flew as Yimo dug deeper, and soon he was already more than 10 meters in. It was already starting to feel suffocating, but something like that was nothing to Yimo. He was a cultivator, albeit being only in the second stage of chi gathering. He could still breathe internally with enough water. Yimo's digging speed was very fast, and 3 hours later, he had already dug more than 100 meters. His method consisted of digging a big chunk and sending it back before pushing away the two sides. If his bag hadn't been so large, perhaps he would have been 200 meters in by now. At that moment, Yimo estimated that the tunnel behind him should have already been blocked completely. He dug another 200 meters, and his shovel suddenly hit something hard. Yimo felt overjoyed. He should have arrived. This hard thing should be a rock. And as Yimo scanned with his spirit sense, he discovered that it was indeed a big green rock. It was very thick, almost a meter in diameter. Yimo wasn't impetuous. He sat down first and took a pill with some water to recover his chi. He was digging diagonally, so this stone was probably around 200 meters underground. After he had taken an hour to rest, Yimo completely recovered his energy. He gathered the chi into the metal spade and hacked towards the stone. Immediately, rubble flew everywhere. The stone was like mud under Yimo's spade. In less than half an hour, Yimo dug a meter-deep hole into the stone. Just when Emo crawled into the hole, the sand outside fell into the hole and quickly covered it up. The place Emo landed was very spacious and looked like a street. However, there was a bad odor everywhere that was weird and indescribable, similar yet unlike of a rotten smell. He followed the street and walked tens of meters while expanding his spirit sense out. Finally, he realized it wasn't a street, but a road made of stone blocks. Emo carefully walked forward along this road, keeping his spirit sense on the surrounding because he was sure that Black Shadow also came here. He just didn't know where it was, and Emo was sure that there were entrances other than the one he dug up, which perhaps didn't even need digging. After walking for a while, Emo hadn't seen a single house on the side of the road, and instead thought that it looked a lot more like a valley, so it became obvious that this place wasn't some underground city. As if he had just sensed something, Emo stopped his footsteps, and even though he was a cultivator, he felt the atmosphere around became eerie. A row of huyang tree roots was lined up at the two sides, and what gave Emo goosebumps was one of the huyang tree roots. He could clearly see with his spirit sense that the root had a metal nail on it, one that had been marked with his spirit sense. His nail had really hit a huyang tree root, and even if Emo didn't want to believe it, the facts were in front of him, so he had no choice. There weren't such eerie feelings even in the cultivation realm, but here it had occurred right in front of his face. Emo definitely wouldn't believe that such a huyang tree root could avoid his tracking for a day and night and still move so fast. Besides, that huyang tree root appeared to be anchored there and wouldn't be able to move from this position. Emo was on full alert as he walked beside the huyang tree root. He studied it carefully with his spirit sense and realized that his speculations appeared to be right. It seemed that it was really the metal nail that he had thrown. But in order to confirm it, Emo took out his torch and saw with his own eyes that the metal nail on it really belonged to him. His spirit sense was right. It made Emo wonder how a huyang tree root could move so fast. He didn't touch that nail and instead went into contemplation. Suddenly, Emo remembered that 2 days ago he had hit the black shadow around its shoulder, but this huyang tree root had the metal nail on its upper body. The position wasn't right. Then, Emo found another problem. He saw that this nail had been exposed a bit on the outside. Emo thought that with his power, if he were the one to have shot this nail at the root, there was no way that the nail wouldn't be completely lodged inside. All these signs showed that Emo wasn't the one that inserted the nail there, but it was done later by someone or something else. Who could put a nail in the huyang tree root? Emo frowned and carefully pulled the nail out. Soon he found some blood and even a long strand of hair. This nail really was put there by something. He could tell by looking at the hair that the thing that had been hit was probably a monkey-like animal. Emo found it very strange that there was such animal in the desert. However, he knew that monkeys and apes were very smart, so it was natural that they could think of such ways. When Emo thought the problem clearly and knew what sort of animal he was chasing, everything became so clear. This animal was not only very smart, but also good at running away. There was only one road underneath the desert, and other than the huyang tree roots, there were sand and stone boards. It seemed that a long time ago, someone made this stone block road leading to somewhere, and even specially planted the huyang tree root at the side. Emo increased his speed and walked along the stone road. He knew that since the shadow could escape here, it meant that it had already run inside. As long as he followed this road, he could chase up to it. However, what made Emo disappointed was that he had walked here for half a day, but not only did he not see the shadow, he also didn't even know if there was an end to this road. If it wasn't a one-way road, Emo would have thought that he was lost again. After so long, Emo estimated that he probably wouldn't be able to catch up to the shadow and felt helpless. The place this thing had escaped to was too absurd, and besides, it was too smart. Emo didn't bother tracking the shadow anymore and didn't even look at what was on the side. He simply started to rush forward. After another half a day's time and a few turns on the road, there was finally a stairway leading up. However, it wasn't long. only 20 to 30 meters or so. Yi-Emo walked up to it and scanned out with his spirit sense. Then he understood that he came to another open space. However, a huge stone was blocking the entrance. He ran for an entire day around on the stone block road and had no idea which hairy animal had tricked him. This road was probably more than 10 kilometers long, but was a bit curly, giving enough time for Yi-Emo to think more thoroughly about this place. Who planted this with huyang trees at the side? Why is that road so long? This was a hefty project. Could a huyang tree grow underground? Yi-Emo wasn't sure if it had grown above the ground before and then sank down. Since Yi-Emo wasn't able to know for sure, he shook his head and walked to the end of the stairway. He moved the stone block, however, no sand fell, which implied that it wasn't covered by the desert. He walked through the entrance and discovered an immense underground desert. However, when Yi-Emo scanned with his spirit sense again, he couldn't help but be immediately shocked. Chapter 108. Re-encounter. Chapter 108. Re-encounter. The scene he saw was a desert, but this wasn't the main point. The main point was that it was grown full of purple heart vine. Under the scan of Yi-Emo's spirit sense, there were hundreds of them. Yi-Emo took out the torch and shone it over the surroundings. There was a dense patch of purple heart vine even in the distance. Furthermore, they were even thicker than the wrist. They definitely had been growing for thousands or even tens of thousands of years. Purple heart vine, although it is the spirit herb of the lowest level in the cultivation realm, it would be very valuable if it was more than 3,000 years old. One could even sell it for hundreds of spirit stones. But now there's so much here. Yi-Emo held his breath. He was indeed shocked. He did find purple heart vine. Moreover, there was so much, and they were all very old. However, he didn't feel the slightest sense of joy. Instead, he felt a faint sadness. What was this? Yi-Emo didn't move. Instead, he closed his eyes and felt with his spirit sense. Indeed, this place was surrounded by purple heart vine. He saw right, but that faint sense of sadness was also real. Suddenly, Yi-Emo noticed a problem. It was that purple heart vine was a spirit herb and they had been growing for many years, making them high-level spirit herbs. However, he didn't feel a sense of spirit chi here. What was this? The purple heart vines still laid across the desert and didn't even change their shape at all. So even if these purple heart vine had withered, they could still be used for medicine. Yi-Emo walked close to a purple heart vine slowly, and he felt a sense of rotting well up in his heart. He blew lightly, and the 3-meter tall purple heart vine actually turned to dust. Yi-Emo was stunned. He walked to a few more and blew. These purple heart vines all turned to dust and disappeared. As if feeling the moment of Yi-Emo's arrival, these thousands of purple heart vine all turned to dust. If Yi-Emo didn't see it for his own eyes, he would have thought something eerie happened again. The desert full of purple heart vine suddenly disappeared in an instant. Yi-Emo stood there without moving, feeling extremely bitter. He looked for a long time and finally found the secret of the purple heart vine. However, this secret was useless to him. He had lost his interest of going to Kulu. Since he already found purple heart vine here, there was no point going elsewhere. Plus, even if Kulu had purple heart vine, it probably wouldn't be better than here. Yi-Emo walked into the desert. No one seemed to have come here before. This desert wasn't big, and soon he reached its end. A huge stone tablet stood before Yi-Emo with the 2 words Ku Lake. So this was Ku Lake. It seemed that Ku Lake, like Luobu Lake, was a big lake, but eventually turned into desert. Yi-Emo put his hand on the tablet, feeling a faint sense of disappointment. He didn't get what he wanted coming to the desert. It seemed that he could only return to his clinic and slowly cultivate his silver heart grass. However, if he wanted to do that, he needed to keep a low profile, and Yi-Emo didn't really want that. Even if he wanted to, he already exposed himself in the Taklamakan, so perhaps he wouldn't even be able to keep a low profile. Yi-Emo's thoughts suddenly stopped. He looked at his hand in surprise as he felt a faint sense of spirit chi pass from the tablet to his hand. However, that spirit chi was too weak, almost unable to be used for cultivation. However, even so, he still needed to make out the situation. He just dug out this tablet and cleaned up the dirt around it. A dried-up spirit chi appeared in front of Yi Mo's face. No wonder there was some spirit chi. It was a dried-up spirit well. Yi Mo was disappointed, however, because he understood why there was so much purple heart vine here. Originally, there was a spirit well here. This was really a pity. If this spirit well still had water, Yi Mo would perhaps even want to live here. Although it was dark, it was better than having no place to cultivate. Yi Mo felt the spirit well and sighed. He poured down a bottle of water and said, "A spirit well actually doesn't have water, then I'll give you some water." In the desert, perhaps only Yi Mo would do such a thing. He was a cultivator and had a natural gratitude towards spirit wells and spirit things. Plus, he didn't mind giving this bottle of water. Since he didn't find the purple heart vine, he was about to go out. When Yi Mo poured the water down the spirit well, something surprising happened. The spirit well actually emitted a thin spirit chi, as though repaying Yi Mo's bottle of water. Yi Mo felt this, and surprisingly discovered that he could cultivate with this spirit chi. Thinking about this, Yi Mo was no longer stingy and poured all the water he had down, including the bag of water the yellow-dressed lady gave him. As expected, the spirit chi increased a little. Yi Mo quickly sat down and cultivated. The reason he didn't care about water was that he was in the latter part of stage 2. As long as he could reach stage 3 with this spirit chi, he wouldn't care if he had no water, because at that time he would be able to use water magic. Time passed fast as he cultivated. Yi Mo didn't know how long he cultivated for, but it was approximately 3 to 4 days. When he woke up, he found that there was no more spirit chi from the well. Yi Mo could only helplessly stood up. This spirit well had been tried for too long, and because of that, it wasn't enough for him to reach stage 3. However, Yi Mo felt his power and discovered he was at the peak of stage 2, just a thin line from level 3. Perhaps in less than 2 years, as long as the opportunity came, he could ascend to level 3. Yi Mo bowed to the spirit well. No matter what, this spirit well helped him a lot. However, Yi Mo knew that no matter how much water he had, perhaps this spirit well could only emit this last spirit chi. Yi Mo didn't know how this place formed, but it seemed that someone intentionally used the desert as a barrier to protect this spirit well and purple heart vines. After eating some simple food, Yi Mo walked over to the staircase and climbed up another staircase. A few minutes later, Yi Mo arrived at the bottom of a stone board again. He moved it aside and sand fell, causing a piercing bright ray of sunlight to fall on his eyes. Knowing that he had already come out, he returned the board back before covered it up with sand. Perhaps one day he would once again return here due to the dried-up spirit well. When Yi Mo stood in the desert again, he realized he was actually in a patch of forest. However, this forest was dead. There were dead huyang tree roots everywhere. Just when Yi Mo was thinking if this was the legendary demon forest, a few gunshots interrupted his thought, making him frown. There were gunshots. Did Nanqing's people chase here? But then he thought that even if it were Nanqing people, they wouldn't shoot without seeing him. But soon Yi Mo understood. A yellow-dressed lady stumbled from the demon forest and dashed to the side. It was the girl who saved him. She had a red spot on her shoulder. She had already lost her bag, and a few men with guns even chased her here. Seeing their ferocious looks, Yi Mo knew they were from Nanqing. A sense of guilt rose from Yi Mo's heart. He didn't think that the woman who saved him was hurt due to him and being hunted. This woman not only saved Yi Mo, but in Yi Mo's heart, she was also like a goddess. However, now these bastards even dared to hunt her, so he immediately felt the intent to kill. The yellow-dressed lady was stumbling harder, causing Yi Mo to be quite surprised. Even if she couldn't dodge the gun, These few men shouldn't be a match for her. Why was she like this? He didn't have time to think. Just when Guillermo was about to shoot out metal nails, a sudden chick-chick sounded. In the desert, it was rather piercing. This sound was getting louder and louder. Not only did Guillermo hear it, but also the girl and those few men heard the sound. All the people looked at the direction of the sound unanimously, and what they saw was a patch of bugs with a disgusting, flowery pattern at its back. There was countless ones of them all crawling out of the sand. Immediately, they covered a huge patch of ground, and this was just the beginning. From that small area, they then covered hundreds of yards in a blink of an eye. These bugs had 4 legs and walked extremely fast. The front of their mouth seemed to only have a single tooth. When countless of these bugs suddenly appeared in the desert, making the chick-chick sounds, everyone felt a chill ran down their bones, even with the sun shining brightly. The 3 Nanqing people immediately reacted and wanted to escape for their lives. However, these bugs had swarmed up. In a few breaths, these 3 didn't even have any bones left. Even the gun in their hands were eaten. The bugs that were involved in devouring them immediately grew larger and blacker. Even the pattern on their backs were clearer. Guillermo gasped. He immediately thought of the yellow-dressed lady. She also saw the bugs, however. She no longer had any strength as her eyes reflected her loss and hope. Suddenly, she became really peaceful and just fell onto the sand. You're tuning in to the Thunder Spear YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.